to Esri, right?
Absolutely.
I'm a master at Google Meets. And you know what? In defense of us as a commission, I think if our age was maybe a few decades younger, we would have had a different experience. You know what I mean? Like the way our brains are wired to, perceive information. We're of a different generation.
Absolutely.
Allie, you have a hand raise. Is that for a reason?
I believe it was an accident.
Okay.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not generational.
It's not for me.
Thank you. Good one.
Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, Robert.
Good morning.
Everybody. Morning, Derek.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, I think we have our entire team. Just to give everybody a heads up, Commissioner York had to go out of town, and so he won't be joining us today. So the good news is, I don't expect any, substantial votes on anything, and all the material he'll be able to, recoup. But if I could just get a check from staff that we have all our key team members in place and ready to go. The transcriptionist. I see Angela. Hello.
I believe we're ready to go. We're waiting on Mr. Bradshaw to join us. He's one of our guest speakers, but we could probably get started.
Yeah. Okay, great. With that, we will dive in. Welcome, everybody. Agenda item 1, call to order and roll call. 1A, call for quorum. It is 8:01 a.m. on Tuesday, August 31st, 2021. I call this meeting of the Independent Redistricting Commission to order. For the record, the Executive Assistant, Valerie Newman, will be taking roll. When your name is called, please indicate you are present. If you're unable to respond verbally, we ask that you please type your name. Val.
Vice Chair Watchman.
Present.
Commissioner Lerner.
Present.
Commissioner Meal.
Present.
Chairperson Newberg.
Present. And after saying Commissioner York is not going to be joining us, I see a tile that's labeled Douglas York.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner York, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, welcome. So you can say
Get the video to work, but I can listen.
Okay, for the record, can you indicate that you are present?
Present.
Thank you. And we also have in attendance Executive Director Brian Schmidt, Deputy Director Lori Van Haren, Public Information Officer Michelle Crank, Community Outreach Coordinators Marie Chappell and Alex Pena. From our legal team, we have got Brett Johnson and Eric Spencer from Snell and Wilmer, Roy Herrera and Jillian Andrews from Ballard Spar. We have our mapping consultants, Mark Flahan from Timmins, Doug Johnson from NDC Research, Ivy Beller-Sikansky from NDC Research. We have special guest Robert Medler from the Western Growers Association, Bill Bradshaw from the Arizona Farm Bureau, and Sarah Porter from the Kyle Center for Water Policy. And finally, our transcriptionist, Angela Miller. That is everyone.
Okay, thank you, Val. And please note for the minutes that a quorum is present. 1B, call for notice. Val, was the notice and agenda for the commission meeting properly posted 48 hours in advance of today's meeting?
Yes, it was, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 2, approval of minutes from August 24th, 2021. We have 2A, the general session, and we have 2B, the executive session, which reflected agenda item number 6, which was an update on a public records request. Is there any conversation on the minutes from last week?
This is Commissioner Lerner. Commissioner Watchman joined a little bit late, but he's not listed as present. So I don't know, I don't remember when he joined, but he probably needs to be listed at some point because it does show him making or seconding a motion or making a motion.
I will make that correction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And let's make sure to note the time stamp that he joined.
Okay.
Commissioner Meal, with that correction, I move that we approve the both the regular and executive session minutes from last week.
Vice Chair Watchman seconds.
Any further discussion? Okay, we'll do a vote. Vice Chair Watchman,
Aye.
Commissioner Meal,
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner,
Aye.
Commissioner York. Okay, Commissioner York, if you can sign back on and say an aye,
Aye.
please do. Okay. Commissioner Newberg is an aye, and with that, the minutes are passed 5-0. Thank you again, Val, and for making that correction. Agenda item number 3, opportunity for public comments. Public comment will now open for a minimum of 30 minutes and remain open until the adjournment of the meeting. Comments will only be accepted electronically in writing on the link provided in the notice and agenda for this public meeting and will be limited to 3,000 characters. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 4, discussion on public comments received prior to today's meeting. I open it up to my colleagues.
This is Commissioner Lerner. I just want to say thank you for some interesting comments, good feedback about taking public comments and hearing from you in different ways. I know a number of you commented, or a few of you commented on comparing how things went 10 years ago with public comments, but we're navigating a different environment now with the virtual environment. And so while some of what you want, we would love to do as well, it might be a little more difficult with some of the challenges that we have. So while I appreciate your feedback and would love to see us do some of that, we're doing our best to try to get as much feedback as possible from you. And please keep those comments coming in. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, to add to Commissioner Lerner's comment and to, add a little depth or context, there are challenges to opening up business meetings to the public input and have it be equitable and productive. When there's physical meetings, people have to drive there, come, there's an investment of time, and organically, there's a maximum number of people that come. With a virtual system to open up a business meeting, the amount of public comment would likely be so huge that it would require us to play an active role in being an arbiter of who gets access and who doesn't, which puts to question, equity. And so, given that we have these wonderful opportunities of public hearings, we had 15 of them to date. We'll hear today of additional plans for substantive time for the public to come to speak to us. It's the same access. The information is coming to us, but it's a more organic way that I think is equitable when we can put ourselves out to the community, and you will hear about it. I do firmly believe that at the end of the day, we will far surpass opportunities to share direct feedback with us face to face than previous commissions. It is our desire to be out there meeting the public. Other comments, I know there was a concern that we do not have videos of the public hearings from Coconino County and Pinal County. Again, sometimes, technology doesn't work. We will work towards providing transcripts for those hearings so that the content of the information will be available to the public. We do need a little time to go through and just correct any, unwanted mistakes. There was a comment that alluded to something that one of our council members, Brett Johnson, said, alluding to contact between stakeholders and our mapping folks, the Timmons group. I'm not sure I understand, exactly what was said, but let me reassure the public and set the record straight. There's no conversation going on between the mapping team and anyone in the public or any of the commissioners, to my knowledge, about anything related to lines or the data we're receiving. The stakeholders are the public. It's the people that have been submitting data and information. And so please know there's no communication going on. And then finally, yes, the public has expressed some frustration with navigating how to submit the communities of interest surveys, their own mapping tools. I can say the commissioners commiserate. And, we will continue to work with our mapping team and try to make it as user-friendly as possible. And worst comes to worst, we will receive information the old-fashioned way through your hand-drawn maps and words, but collectively we'll work through it. We're just getting started. But thank you for letting us know what works and what doesn't work. So with that, and any other comments from my colleagues on public comments? Okay, with that, we will move to agenda item number 5, Arizona 5C presentation round 1. We're excited to have 3 speakers with us. I don't know, Director Schmidt, would you like me to introduce them? Do you want to introduce them? How should we proceed?
If you want to introduce them, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. I believe first up is Sarah Porter. She is the director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy at ASU. She's a graduate of Harvard and received her law degree from ASU, just 3rd in the class. Welcome. We're excited to hear from you, and please take it away.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I do have a PowerPoint, which I emailed very late to Valerie, but can I go ahead and, it looks like I can present. So,
Please.
it's my first time doing it on this particular app. Is my screen, let's see, it should be sharing. It looks like I've succeeded. It's amazing. I want to start by thanking you commission members. It's really quite an honor to be able to speak to you, and I'm very grateful as an Arizonan for your service. It's my understanding that members of the commission are interested in water and how water may possibly interface with the important work that you're doing. And water is a huge topic. I could spend, I mean, probably no surprise to you, but I could spend hours and hours talking about it. What I'm going to try to do is give you a very, very brief 60,000 foot perspective, and then hopefully there will be a few minutes for questions. Let's see if we're working here. Just a brief explanation of where I work. The Kyle Center for Water Policy is a 6-year-old policy center that's part of ASU's 40-year-old Morrison Institute for Public Policy. And our work at the Kyle Center is basically the same as at Morrison Institute, except that we focus on critical water issues in Arizona and the West. And we do this in a way that is an approach that is nonpartisan, that's based on research, data, and analysis, and with respect for the historical context in which water issues emerge. Next. So let's start with a fact that's probably not a surprise to any of you, and that is that the state of Arizona is mostly an arid or semi-arid region. This is a wonderful precipitation map that was actually using about a 30-year-old data set that ended in 1990. If we looked at such a map that was using the last 30 years, you would see even more red, orange, and yellow, which indicate arid to semi-arid areas. And so the fact is, we don't get all the water we need to do all of the things we want to do in the state from the rain and snow that falls within the boundaries of the state every year. And so the state of Arizona has been importing water for quite some time. And that's really the strategy: import and store so that we have enough for the future. So very quickly, here's where we get our water from. And this is changing a little, because I'm sure that many of you have read about there's a shortage declaration on the Colorado River. There's been an effort to leave water in one of the big Colorado reservoirs, Lake Mead, which is by Las Vegas. But essentially, we get about 40% of our water supply from groundwater. That's water that's pumped from wells. About 36, this is going down, percent of the water from the Colorado River, and then the rest mostly from other surface water systems. And the biggest other surface water system and the biggest system in the state is the Salt Verde system, which is managed by SRP and delivers water to users in the greater Phoenix area. This is a little bit of a misleading slide in showing that effluent is only 4% of our water use. It's through some kind of accounting that they do at the Department of Water Resources that has to do with direct use of water. Just suffice it to say that over 90% of water that enters the treatment stream is recycled. Arizona is a national leader in water recycling. In Greater Phoenix, because we have the Salt Verde system, the mix is a little different. We use less groundwater, more CAP water, and let me just take a moment to explain that, of course, the Colorado River is along the western border of the state, and so to bring Colorado River water to central Arizona from Phoenix and Tucson, there is a canal system called the Central Arizona Project, also known as CAP or CAP. It's a 330-mile-long canal that made its first delivery in 1985. And in a year where there's no shortage, the CAP has an allocation, or CAP users have an allocation amounting to 1.6 million acre-feet of water. And then as you see on this slide, the Salt Verde system is another significant fraction of the water that is used in the greater Phoenix area. In Tucson, it's a little different. Colorado River water via the CAP is a much bigger share of water because Tucson doesn't have a big intrastate river system like the Salt Verde system. And but now to what I think will interest you all. And I must say, as a water geek, I spend a lot of time looking at maps. And so I felt kind of delighted to know I'd be coming to speak with a group that's focusing a lot on maps. But this is a sort of like a spaghetti plate of lines that shows you, you'll see the counties are 15 counties in the bold black lines. And then the blue lines show groundwater basins. And these are, in other words, fairly discrete aquifers that hold water, and they're shaped differently. There are many differences among them, but you can think of these. And I know I'm not a hydrologist. Hydrologists would probably really object to my saying this, but think of these as 54 giant bathtubs in the state that hold groundwater. For now, we can do that. There are also hydrogeological designations in the state of subbasins. There are around 85 subbasins. Subbasins are less geological and more designated because of how humans are using the water there. So we don't need to worry too much about that. What I wanted to show you here is there isn't much correlation between the groundwater basins and the county lines, is there? In fact, we could overlay legislative districts and you would see there's very little correlation between legislative districts and groundwater basins. So that's just something that necessitates at least cooperation among people from county to county if we're trying to deal with a whole groundwater basin typically. So one big important fact in Arizona, I'll share with you a couple of really important facts policy-wise. One of the most important aspects of water management in Arizona is that in 1980, the state passed the Groundwater Management Act. And this meant that the most populous areas, as designated by the blobs you see on this map, have a cap and trade system on groundwater. There is a prohibition on the development of new agriculture. New residential subdivisions have to prove up a 100-year supply of water before they can be developed. And water can be stored underground in these regions for credits. And that way, there's a sort of bank of groundwater that is used in the same way that water that's stored in reservoirs would be used, because there is this cap and trade system on groundwater. You'll also see in the map the blue dotted line, which is the CAP, the Central Arizona Project, that long canal that brings Colorado River water to these regions, the Phoenix, Pinal County, and Tucson regions. And that has been a big part of enabling the Groundwater Management Act to happen. It was a big imported supply of water that made it possible for these areas to get off the use of groundwater. And then you might be able to see some red squiggly lines near Phoenix, and those are the SRP canals that are the infrastructure that delivers water from the SRP system. Now, I mentioned before the potential shortage in the Colorado River, Colorado watershed. The first shortage was announced on August 16th. First ever shortage of water from the Colorado River was announced on August 16th, this very month. And because Arizona, essentially the CAP region, agreed to be the junior user, the CAP users are first in line for a cut when there are cuts, according to an agreement that the 7 states and Mexico reached in 2019. So this is a chart that shows the level of cuts. It's not too important to delve into, too much into the details here, but I'll simply say that we're in a tier 1 shortage going into 2021, which is a 512,000 acre foot cut. And remember, I said the CAP could deliver 1.6 million acre feet. So we're looking at close to a third of the delivery capacity of the CAP. And if Lake Mead continues to decline, the CAP users face steeper and steeper cuts up to as much, close to half of the water that can be delivered by the system. So this is a very significant challenge for those blobs on the map that we just saw for the areas in the CAP service territory, Phoenix, Pinal County, and Tucson. The first cut will primarily be felt by agriculture in Pinal County. That's one big thing. And the other big thing that I want to share with you is the issue of outside of the active management areas, outside of the blobs from Phoenix to Tucson and Prescott and the Santa Cruz blob, there is virtually no regulation of groundwater. Essentially, you can drink, if you want to drill a well and use the water under your land, there isn't any law that really stops you from doing that. And so we have a lot of areas in Arizona that are primarily groundwater dependent. The green areas in this map are places that are primarily 75% or more of their water supply is groundwater. Now, there are increasing concerns over the long-term water resilience of some of these areas. And there are many reasons for the concerns. A big driver of the concern is the influx of large agriculture. But there are other reasons too. This is just a map to show you which groundwater basins, if they're pink or red, they are experiencing a greater than 3 foot per year decline over the last 20 years in their groundwater tables. And whenever you see that kind of steady decline over 10 years or 20 years, that should be cause for concern. So inside the AMAs, there's a lot of regulation, and there are essentially legal tools for getting some kind of handle over groundwater use, but outside of the AMAs, there are virtually no legal tools. And one more, I think, important fact, if we look outside of the AMAs, in other words, outside of the groundwater management blobs, we can see that large wells that are pumping more than 35 gallons per minute, and 35 gallons per minute or less is considered kind of a residential well. Anyway, large wells are responsible for a huge amount of the statewide pumping capacity, but because we don't have any regulation on groundwater, we don't know how much water is actually being pumped out of those wells. So I don't want to leave you with a big time downer. I will instead leave you with some reason for hope. This is a graphic developed by the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and it tells a super important story. It shows on this graphic, the gray bar represents growth of the gross state product. Think of it as a stand-in for the economy, and you can see we've gone from a 15 billion economy in the mid-50s to almost a $300 billion economy at 2018. The orange little guys figures are the growth in population. Of course, everybody knows we've grown from 1 million to almost 7 million, maybe more than 7 million now. And the blue line shows our statewide water demand. And what you can see is that from 1980, our statewide water demand has been declining. And the takeaway from that is that in Arizona, we have figured out a way to make sure that there's water for a much larger amount of population and have a much bigger economy on less water than we were using in 1980. In fact, less water than we were using in the mid-1950s. So to me, this says there's a lot of opportunity through very smart management and cooperation and collaboration to figure out all of the water challenges that our state faces. I want to leave you with a resource. It's a Kyle Center Water Data Hub, the AZ Water Blueprint, Arizona Water Blueprint. Here's the website, azwaterblueprint.asu.edu. You can go to this website and go to an interactive map that has a wealth of data about water. Or if you're not ready to explore the interactive map, I think you guys would be, but if not, go over to the Story Maps and Apps Gallery, where we have guided tours of critical water policy issues in the state. You can find out a lot of information there. And finally, I hope that, I'm thrilled that you have taken this interest in water, and I hope that we can be a resource for you in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I know I have some questions, but of course, I'm going to open it up to the other commissioners. Please ask away. I'm happy to get started while my colleagues kind of get their questions, gathered. I'm wondering, and please, let us know what you're comfortable answering and what you're not comfortable answering, because from our perspective, at least in my mind, I'm going to want to take what you shared and apply it to people and communities, and understand what it means for these communities. And so I'm curious, with what you shared about water sources of water, are there certain areas that you feel the water issue rises to the level where a specific community would value from independent representation there? Either there's a significant deficit of water that's affecting their ability to live their lives fully, or is there an abundance of water and they're sitting on resources and they're best kept together such that they can take advantage of that, the power of that resource? If you're comfortable.
Yeah, I am. I think that is such an interesting question. And there, in any location, well, let me start by saying there are some regions in the state where people really are struggling for water, and the most well-known, of course, is up in the northeastern part of the state on the Navajo reservation. The reasons for the problems, the difficulties, really are to some degree apart from representation. They have more to do with the struggle that, for example, the Navajo Nation, Hopi, same, have had in the courts to have their water right recognized. Maybe representation would help in those instances, but a lot of it has to do with processes that are really beyond representation at, let's say, a local legislative district level. It never hurts to have leaders who are well-versed and willing to push issues, but that isn't what springs to mind as the thing that would really be helpful. In other places, and I kind of smiled when you said an abundance of water, because I'll tell you the lay of the land, and it's really up to those places to express the need for a particular kind of representation or boundaries. But really, right now what we're seeing is more tension between the central Arizona growth areas, let's say the Sun Corridor from Phoenix to Tucson, and the western part of the state where there are communities that have supplies of Colorado River water that, in the minds of some people in central Arizona, could be freed up to be moved to central Arizona so that they can supply more economic activity and population growth. So there are certainly people in the West who are really vigilantly guarding their water supplies and feel concerned about interest in moving those water supplies. I'm not sure that they need particular legislative boundaries, because this is really something that's defining for the region, for that, and the entire western border. Apart from that, where there really are, maybe there is potential, is where there are groundwater basins that are in decline, and people are looking for solutions for coping with this problem. A big difficulty in those places is that there isn't consensus on what to do. Some people want some kind of management. Some people don't want that. They see that as an interference with their use of their property. So, I think it would be very interesting for you as a commission to keep an ear open for what people, how people are thinking about water and their own representation. But it's hard to right now think of any place where there's clearly a group of people that don't feel heard, where the problem is the way their electoral districts are drawn.
Thank you. And just for clarification, the source of the water from groundwater is just natural rain, or is it
Yeah.
additional run? So with potential climate change, do we suspect that the quantity of groundwater will decline?
That's another great question. A lot of climate change experts predict that there will be less rain overall, less precipitation, less snow. Some predict that there will be much greater variability. In other words, more feasts and famine, but not necessarily less overall. But yes, for sure, prolonged drought puts terrible pressures on groundwater supplies, both because in groundwater dependent communities, people tend to, they use up what's there, but also because when the ground itself gets really dry, that reduces the amount of water that flows into rivers, for example, or that's available. And just to be clear, in most of the groundwater basins in the state, we're not talking, we really don't have renewable groundwater supplies the way you can imagine in, in another part of the country, let's say Pennsylvania, where they get so much rain that you couldn't, you can pump as much as you want. You can have as many wells as imaginable and not impact the aquifers. That isn't the case in Arizona, and a lot of the groundwater supplies, most of the groundwater supplies that are currently being used are fossil supplies, water that went into the ground thousands of years ago or eons ago. And so how much it rains in a few years isn't as significant as the fact that communities are relying on and even growing in reliance on finite supplies of water. That's the big, big challenge.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner Lerner. Just as a follow-up to the discussion that you just had about water management, when agreements are made between farmers and ranchers and development and tribes, there are lots of different groups that have that. It's on water management, and with the declining resources that exist, it would seem that that's where having representation of people who are knowledgeable about the water issues in those regions would be very helpful. And as we continue to develop these agreements, we have a number of agreements. We have agreements that were made with the Gila River Indian community, just south of Phoenix, and other communities around the state. That's, I guess, from my perspective, that's where some of that understanding of water management would come in handy from a legislative perspective, whether it's at the state or federal level. And that's, I guess I'd like your perspective on that, because I know those agreements are going to continue to have to be revised and adjusted as our water levels change.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I hope that nothing I said in answer to Commissioner Newberg's question suggested that I don't think people could be helped by having elected officials who are really knowledgeable about water. I think that is one of the things that's most important for our state, and history proves that. You're referring, I think, to settlements with tribes, tribal settlements. And when I mentioned the Navajo and Hopi before, that's what I was talking about, that tribes have a choice of either winning in court against all the other water users in a watershed, or negotiating a settlement with water users in order to have their water right finalized. And we have, Arizona's done a good job with finalizing certain settlements with tribes, and yet we still have quite a lot of work to do. A number of tribes don't have settlements yet, and we have court proceedings at the same time, kind of in parallel. Without question, it is extremely helpful to have officials, and particularly at the federal level, who are knowledgeable about water. Settlements require a lot of help from the Department of Water Resources, our state technical expert. They require a degree of proactive involvement from the governor, from our governor. And they also require federal legislation, and it is extremely difficult to accomplish a tribal settlement without dedicated delegation staff and members who will really drive those settlements through.
And just as a follow-up to that, there's also that potential, and I don't mean conflict in a bad way, but conflicting interests between, I know we're going to be hearing from other of the 5 Cs, but, farming community, the agricultural community. And, we can just look in the Phoenix metropolitan area and see how growth has taken lands that once were used for agricultural purposes. And as things get moved around, there are needs that they have, as do other industries. Mining is another one that's come up. In looking at mining to the east of us, the amount of water that would be used has to be balanced with the impacts that it has on the community economically, and the environment that it might have. So that's where I guess I'm thinking in terms of representation, people who understand those kinds of issues.
Yeah, well, again, for me, this goes to always, it would be great if as voters, it's a thing I say all the time, I wish we would all ask people running for office water questions to make sure that they understand how important it is. The conflict that you mentioned, I mean, what you're talking about is competition among users, and we're going to have that no matter what, because we don't have enough water for all the demand that we can imagine. Where it comes to agriculture versus urban, for the most part, we're talking about growth in the Sun Corridor, looking to transfer water supplies from the west, from the Colorado River. What you mentioned before, the loss of ag land in Phoenix, the Phoenix area, and that was actually the negotiated plan, the strategy that emerged from the Groundwater Management Act, that it was kind of recognized that growth on former ag land is the most water sustainable kind of urban growth. And that's why agriculture committed, it wasn't easy, but they agreed to a prohibition on the development of new agriculture in the active management areas. It meant that their lands would eventually probably give way to urban development. But the whole idea at the time was that is a way to sustainably develop cities in an extremely arid region. But yes, I couldn't agree with you more. I think having representatives who are well-versed in water issues or who have staff who are expert in water issues it has always been critically important. It's only going to get more important for our state.
And Madam Chair, this is Derek, and I agree. Coming and living here on Navajo, the saying is water is life, and so. But a lot of issues are, I think, tied up in court or require federal action. So, what you're suggesting is that fair representation at the federal level is obviously needed. And so, I think a lot of things that I hear up north is that a lot of water was used to produce electricity and produce other things that basically were consumed in Phoenix. And so, it resulted in the growth of central Arizona. And so now you have maybe an economy, especially in the northern part of Arizona, that's behind. And so, how do you bring all that together is what I look at in many cases. And a lot of work that I do is primarily economic development. And so, water is life. And so the way I look at it is that you need water to build economies. And the map that you showed demonstrated that to me, that the growth of the economy and the growth of people and water equates to, improvement. And so, but from a tribal perspective, I agree. What I see is that there's still a lot of action that needs to be resolved in court. But the way I look at it is that, we need to all work together. And in some cases, with all due respect, a lot of folks don't recognize and understand the value and importance and the position of tribes. And so, I always have to think, well, a lot of tribes and reservations were created, in the 1800s, and our great state of Arizona was in 1912. And so, but there's still that challenge of recognizing, what the federal government did, and that's established reservations for many reservations, including my tribe. And so I think we got to keep in perspective that we're all neighbors. We all need to work together. Sometimes I don't get that feeling. And so, but I appreciate your presentation, Sarah. Well, right on the mark. And so thank you for the information. Very good.
Thank you.
I have a question to piggyback on Commissioner Lerner's, topic of competing interests. That taps into a bit of our language of communities of interest, because that's our job, to understand the communities and to make sure they have representation. You mentioned significant communities where water is critical: mining, agriculture, farming. We touched very briefly upon urban demands. Are there other communities that we're missing that for whom water rises to the level of a major issue?
One community that really doesn't have any voters is the environment. I suppose that's a bit of a glib comment, but often we forget about the one that's not always at the table in discussions about water allocation. So there are, of course, groups in Arizona that are really thinking about water for the environment. There are 2 flowing rivers remaining in state, sort of perennially flowing rivers, and that would be the Upper San Pedro down in the southeastern part of the state, and the Verde River in the middle of the state. And those receive a lot of attention from environmental groups. I would say that is a major, the other major community. And of course, within each of those communities, the issues, there are a lot of different issues. There are competing needs within those communities, and the water management issues are different. Some ag regions in the state, and let's look at Yuma. Yuma has the Colorado River running right next to it, and it has fantastic infrastructure for delivering the water to fields. Yuma's water, Yuma Ag's water issues are very different from Pinal County's water issues, where Pinal County Ag has relied on expensive, subsidized water imported from the western border that's now being shorted, that's now subject to shortage. That's a very different issue from how it feels if you're a farmer in Yuma, where what you're doing is trying to, again, for being a little glib, you are worried about keeping the Sun Corridor from coming and making a play for your water. So, and one more thing is that cities, the water issue for cities is so different. I mentioned the high rate of reuse. Cities are in the Sun Corridor are reusing 93% of water that goes into the waste stream. Cities are seeing per capita declines of water averaging 2 to 3% per year, because residential users and commercial users are getting more and more efficient with water. And so part of the reason for that graphic is that the efficiencies have increased so much. There's so much potential for more efficiencies. It isn't necessarily the issue for cities to go, to some degree, I'm contradicting myself. There is a recognized need for greater water supplies for projections for future population, but there's a lot cities can do before they go out and try to get new water supplies, or, because of all of these opportunities for management, for stretching supplies over larger and larger economies and populations.
Thank you. And you mentioned something that really stuck with me, that not all farming communities are the same, meaning they may have very different sources of water, very different interests. And so we need to be careful not to lump rural communities together.
Thank you. And not even within a rural community. You might have some legacy farmers who are worried about new ag that's moved in and developed big new pumps, new wells that are going to really have impacts on the groundwater table. But at the same time, you might have ranchers in those areas who will fight tooth and nail against groundwater management because of a perception that impairs their ability in the future to develop their lands in the way they want to. So I'm generalizing very much. I'm not saying this is how all farmers think and how all ranchers think, but you can't assume that even within a groundwater basin or within a certain boundary, people feel the same. You're going to find competition for water resources within any bounded area.
Other questions? This has been, truly very informative, helpful in us understanding the water issues and also how it relates to all of the different population centers we have in our state. Very important. And I'm sure we're going to be thinking about this as we move into our next presentations. Before we move on, I want to make sure that there's no other questions. Okay, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate,
My
your
pleasure.
insight. Very helpful.
Thanks
With
very
that-
much.
Thank you. With that, we'll move into our next presentation. We're gonna, it will feature two co-speakers, Robert Medler, the Arizona Government Affairs Manager for the Western Growers Association, and Phil Bashaw, and I apologize if I'm butchering your last name, the Chief Executive Officer from the Arizona Farm Bureau. With that, I will turn it over to the two of you.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Newberg. We appreciate the opportunity and the invite to come before the commission and talk. And so real quick, I am Robert Medler with the Western Growers Association. We're a multi-state industry association. Our members are focused on vegetables, fruits, and tree nuts, growers, packers, and shippers. So that pipeline really from farm to the end user there. With that, Phil.
Yes, and similarly, I want to thank the commission for allowing us to come and speak today. It's an honor for us to come and talk about the agriculture industry around the state. My name is Philip Bashaw. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Arizona Farm Bureau. We are the state's largest general farm organization. We represent 2,400 producers of all crops and commodities and livestock across the state of Arizona. We have growers in all 15 counties, and we have 14 active county farm bureaus. And so, as you can imagine, we are a large statewide grassroots organization. So.
Great. So I'm just gonna share my screen here. If it. Let's see, slideshow. Does that look right to everybody? I only see my slides now.
Looks good to me, Robert.
Okay, good deal. Thanks. So first time using Google Meets. So also want to extend a thank you to Mr. Schmidt for inviting us specifically to come talk about the agriculture aspect of Arizona's 5 Cs. 4 of the 5 are agriculture. We'll take credit for the climate one as well. So, we'll get to that in a few, but it's a tremendously important aspect of Arizona's economic viability. So agriculture, I would think everyone here would know that it is omnipresent. It is throughout the state, as Phil mentioned. There are farmers and those related to the industry in all 15 counties. Tremendous investment has been made in Arizona in the agriculture community, and $23 billion industry statewide year after year, and that it continues to grow. One of the things to make Arizona fantastic for agriculture is we're fortunate to have the network of rivers, and I'm happy that we actually ended up following Ms. Porter. She's a tremendous asset to the state and her ability, but her knowledge and resources there with the Morrison Institute and the Kyle Center. But she mentioned specifically the San Pedro Valley and the Verde Valley. But we have the Colorado, the Salt, the Gila, Santa Cruz, and in the Little Colorado rivers, along with the tremendous watersheds that the map that she had of the different aquifer basins really shows, I think, how much water there is in Arizona that we're able to use for the economic viability or vitality, excuse me, of Arizona, particularly in the agriculture section. Ag is not new to the state. Agriculture has been going on here well before any of us were around, before we were state, before we were country. For 4,000 years, the people who have lived in what we now call Arizona have had significant agriculture. One of the most interesting things I think I've been to and visited here in the state is the canal system around the ruins in Casa Grande that the Hohokam people built. That's absolutely fascinating to me, and how old they are. If you haven't had a chance to go there and learn about the agriculture of the Hohokam people and how they built the canals off the Gila River, I strongly encourage you to do that in an upcoming weekend as the weather starts to get nicer. But here's just a quick snapshot overview of Arizona ag. Total farms, there's a little over 19,000 with 26 million acres covered in those farms. Of that cropland, there's 7,200 farmers with just shy of 1.3 million acres. Interesting note, the tribal legacy continues on. Just under 60% of farmers in Arizona are members of tribes. It's 58%. So they continue to have a strong role in agriculture here in Arizona. Of that 7,200 farms, 5,400 harvested last year. So a lot of that is range or fallow lands for a cycle, but continue to still be a significant portion of the overall acreage. And total sales last year in agriculture were $3.8 billion. That's the end product net gain there.
Okay, moving on to one of our 5 C's. Subset of the agriculture industry is cattle. As you can see on this slide, cattle and calves are grown on a little over 7,000 farms across the state. Cattle are grown in every county in Arizona, and in beef cows, you're looking at about 5,500 farms and 186 for milk cows and dairy industry. Made up about 641 million for cattle and calves, and then milk from cows is a little over $856 million of economic impact to the state. Another important note is that grazing makes up about 73% of Arizona's total land mass. And so when we talk about grazing and land management within the state of Arizona, it's important to point out that the gentlemen like you see in the picture here are out there, and we consider them stewards of the land. So these folks are out there maintaining water for wildlife, monitoring range conditions, maintaining all of the infrastructure that allows for that wildlife as well as recreation out there on those state and federal lands across the state. And so the ranching community is a very important part of land management throughout the state, and the ability to continue to utilize those lands for recreation and other uses. Another interesting point is that for every 100 jobs in cattle production, there's an additional 65 jobs, created within the communities from related industries within the communities that they reside in. So we'll move on to the next one. Following up on cattle, we have cotton, another of our 5 C's. The central part of Arizona is an extremely good climate to grow cotton. Arizona cotton is actually one of the whitest and highest quality cottons grown in the United States. A lot of this is due to the fact that we have during the growing season for cotton, we have low rainfall, and so the cotton bolls are not as at risk to weather damage. And so this you'll find cotton grown in the central and southern parts of the state, and that would be all irrigated land. Another interesting fact is that Arizona farmers grow enough cotton to provide every person in the United States with a pair of jeans. That's just out of Arizona. That results in about $185 million in total sales, from 284 farms, again in the central and southern part of the state.
The next one is citrus. Citrus has a long history here in Arizona. It originally arrived in the late 1700s courtesy of the Spanish settlers that were coming. But it really wasn't until the 1920s and 30s when you saw it became a cash crop, and the citrus industry really started to grow throughout the state, but mainly in Yuma County and Maricopa County. The sun and the soil are perfect. I'm sure many of you have citrus in your own yards. They grow like weeds as long as you just give them a little water. It's fantastic. We're one of only 4 states in the U.S. that produces citrus for commercial markets. We're second in the nation on lemon, which is primarily Lisbon lemons, and then third in tangerines and tangelos. Oranges and grapefruit over the last few decades have significantly declined in production. And you can see in the number of total farms, just a change from 2012 to 2017, there's been a substantial change in both the number of farms that are growing citrus, but also the total number of acres. In 2010, the last packing house closed for citrus. The last packing house closed in Mesa. And since then, most of the fruit is transported out of state or to Yuma and then shipped to California for the different contracts that the farm have. Most of it is sun-kissed, buys a lot of the citrus that's still grown here in Arizona. Finally, climate. And I know I mentioned this kind of first and foremost, but we all live here for a reason, but plants love growing here for a reason too. Almost throughout the entire state, there's year-round growing conditions. The crops vary depending on where you are in the state, but you can grow almost anything here. Consistently across the state, there's over 300 days of sunshine in a year. That is one of the highest in the nation, if not the highest, that ebbs and flows in here in Florida and Southern California. Arizona's climate's arid and semi-arid, which really, when it comes down to it, that means there's, and Sarah had a slide about the precipitation throughout the state, but from as low as 3 inches a year in the southwest part of the state, Yuma Valley and the Mohawk Welton Valley, to up around 40 inches in the White Mountains. This year might be a little higher for everybody, which has been a nice break after the last 2 dry summers, but that range provides agriculture great opportunity, and just like Phil was saying with the cotton, of how that precipitation comes and what time of year it comes is how that affects the crops and the quality of the crops that we're able to grow here. And then we also have the wide range of hardiness zones, and that's a U.S. Department of Ag, really about the high temperature and the low temperature and how you can plan for both extremes for around growing seasons. So
so following on what Robert mentioned in terms of our unique climate that allows us to grow several different commodities, we also enjoy a number of different specialty crops in the state of Arizona that are a significant economic driver for us as well. For example, tree nuts and dates are grown in a little over 300 farms and 35,000 acres. That's largely dominated by pecans. We have some large pecan operations down in the southern and central part of the state, but also we have pistachios down in Cochise County and those areas, which are a very unique and good specialty crop that we're able to grow here. Because of that climate, we have the opportunity to grow all those different crops. We have growers that grow a number of specialty crops in smaller acreages and some in quite large acreages. For example, in Maricopa County, we grow a number of roses for rootstock in the state. Viticulture is a relatively new crop for us. Our first farm winery was licensed in 1983. But since that time, we've now licensed 108 different farm wineries that are growing wine grapes, largely in the Verde Valley River and down in the Sonoyta Elgin region, Cochise County. They currently contribute about $56 million in economic output, and are contributing to a burgeoning tourism industry for winery tourism in those areas around the state. It's becoming an increasingly important segment of our agriculture industry in the state, an economic driver, certainly for those regions. Not only do you have the economic output for the agriculture industry, but you also have the tourism aspect and the agritourism aspect that they can bring to these rural communities. In addition, our nursery industry is significant as well. The nursery industry is really part of a larger green industry recognized by the Department of Agriculture that includes, turf, golf courses, and those types of things. But our nursery industry, in terms of wholesale and retail nurseries, some garden centers, is a significant driver, particularly in the urban parts of the state.
And then building on the success of cotton and citrus vegetables, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Arizona ranks 5th in the nation for fresh market vegetables. Yuma County is the number 3 county in the country. Monterey County and Fresno County are 1, 2 in the country, and then Yuma. The important thing to realize about that is just how big Yuma's impact is and how much they grow. Their growing season is 4 to 5, or their harvesting season is 4 to 5 months. Those other 2 counties have 8 to 9 month harvesting seasons. So Yuma is a huge producer on the vegetables. And again, shouldn't be a surprise. Almost 1,300 farms with just under 150,000 acres in Arizona focus on growing vegetables. Yuma is the bulk majority of that at almost 110,000 acres. Total sales in 2017 were just over $1 billion. And then Yuma in particular, but across Arizona during the winter growing season, is really known for the specialty crop industry. And that's the leafy greens, cabbage, melons, apples not so much, but the potatoes and tomatoes, to be able to get those grown at a rate of which they can meet the demand during the winter here in the United States, and really for the worldwide export as well. But Yuma is the salad bowl of America during the winter. 85 to 90% of the leafy greens during from November to March come from Yuma. And so that is a substantial investment. You can see that with the total acreage for lettuce. But below, I wanted to just show you, provide a little input or idea, forgive me, of the commodities, the top 10 here in Arizona of vegetable and fruit, or really vegetables, of how much we produce and how many cartons. And you can just see that iceberg and romaine are greatly ahead of the rest of them. Cantaloupes is a summertime or spring and summertime crop, as well as watermelon. So really the challenges facing Arizona agriculture come down to a few things. And the first is workforce and education. Obviously, the workforce needs are changing. They have not been met for years, if not decades. We've seen a declining workforce. Agriculture has become significantly more efficient. I was trying to find it, and you have to forgive me, I wasn't able to, but the Yuma County grows something like 80% more crops on like half the water than they did 30 years ago. And that's not exact. So please forgive me. I will try to find out. I'll have to reach out to some of our members in Yuma and get that. Phil, you might remember that statistic, but agriculture has become significantly more efficient. And with that, the workforce needs have increased. Part of that is just a change in overall economy and in what people want to do with their lives. Some of that has to do with the seasonal worker demands and the requirements, both the availability of it, but also some of the restrictions or the curtailments of the needed workforce to be able to come and particularly during harvest season. And then also the changing climate has a strain on that workforce, whether that be more severe temperatures, more severe storms, the impacts of that after the way of, you have a heavy rainstorm and it blocks your access to be able to leave your house, to get to work, lots of different things. But that has put a strain across the industry, not only here in Arizona, but across the nation. So as a result, agriculture is moving more towards technology. Some of the current technologies are absolutely fascinating. I included a picture. That is a robot harvesting a strawberry. That is from one of our member companies, tech startups. You can see a little black box on the top of that arm. That is the sensor that checks not only the density of the fruit, but also the color of the fruit, and then tells the arm whether to pick it or not. And that's where you go in. If you can tell in the background of the picture, instead of strawberries being on the rows, those are actually multi-tiered shelving units that are growing the strawberries in a greenhouse. And then everything to even having, you see the picture of the gentleman in the field using an iPad or a similar computer, handheld computer. The technology is getting smaller. It's getting more technical, for lack of a better phrase, to where it's in the hand of almost every farmer, regardless of the crop, regardless of where they are. Technology is making a difference. And so one of the things that comes with that is more efficiency. But there's also the downside and an upside of you have to have more advanced training, which is a financial investment, both in time and equipment. You also see investment in more ag-oriented startups. We have an entire program in Salinas, California, that is investing in startups. We have it's a one-story place for startups to get going in Salinas, California, and have access to our member farms to try out some of their technology. And we also financially invest in some of those companies to help them plus out and make it to market. And then in general, across the entire industry, you've seen increased investment in equipment, maintenance, and continued training. A combine of today is not a combine of 20 years ago, much less 40 years ago. And that will continue on. But those are challenges we face. Finally is the water resources. And Ms. Porter, I won't spend too much time on following Ms. Porter, but we're in the midst of a 20+ year drought. We have an over-allocated Colorado River system. There's been water demands are changing across state as municipalities continue to grow and more people realize Arizona is a great place to live, work, and play. That increases the water demands on the municipal side, but we also that turns around and increases the demands on the agriculture side to provide enough food for them. Warmer temperatures as the climate has changed and cycles through. We see the increased need of water for irrigation and the different type of crops and when they can be grown or how long they're grown. That all has impacts on the water. The upsides, not to be a Debbie Downer, is efficiency and production has increased. And that's been a result of farmers in the industry at wide, but particularly farmers using technology out in the field. The first would be a laser leveled field. Is a much more efficient flood irrigation technique. And then you're looking at new drip systems coming on that not only put the water right at the base of the plate, but also can put it subsurface. So like drip tapes that a lot of the melon growers are using now. The water, it's perfectly put at the depth below the surface to where the roots of the watermelon or the cantaloupe will grow down and meet that tape. And then you have less evapotranspiration, which is increases, it's a substantial efficiency benefit.
So one of the challenges that agriculture faces, and we're not unique in this respect. Economic volatility has a huge impact on an industry. Where we are unique is that agriculture is a price taker. It's a price taking nature of our commodity markets. So our markets are highly integrated, and a lot of times our prices are set largely on world markets and global markets. And so when costs increase for our producers here in Arizona, they really don't have the opportunity to pass those costs down to the final consumers. And so that can create increased economic pressures on our farmers here in the state of Arizona. Things like trade discussions, supply chain disruptions, natural disasters can all have a significant impact on those prices, which ultimately impact our farmers here in Arizona. You'll notice that on that slide, we've a recent study came out saying that it was about 3.6 billion in unaccounted for losses due to natural disaster just in 2020. There is one thing I will say about supply disruptions, because I think everyone here probably experienced a little bit of some of the supply disruptions that we saw at the very beginning of COVID. But one of the things I'll point out there is that while supply chain disruptions continue to persist around the world in different industries, Arizona was able to respond relatively quickly and get the food back on our shelves where consumers were purchasing it. And a lot of that relied on not only a complex food supply distribution system, but also the availability of domestic product that's being produced here in the state of Arizona and by our adjoining states, gave us the ability to be much more resilient in our food supply system in that day of or just in time distribution system that we've developed over the years. And then, and last, one of the things that, I don't want to spend too much time on the water issues, and Robert did a great job of covering, the efficiency that we put into those water systems and those types of things. But as we talked about earlier when Sarah Porter was presenting, the agriculture is all over the state, and each of the growing regions around the state have unique challenges when it comes to things like water availability. But beyond that, they have issues as it relates to transportation, as it relates to regulation within the communities they live in, environmental concerns within the communities that they live in. So each one of our growing regions is somewhat unique. And while agriculture is all over the state, and it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where agriculture is or how you could define a community of interest, I'll refer to some maps that we submitted as a part of the public input process that included some outlines and some maps of some relatively significant growing regions within the state of Arizona, with some facts on each one of those growing regions. And now, Commissioner Newberg, you made the point that each one of those growing regions is a little bit unique. They have unique challenges, and so it's difficult to sort of lump them all together. But one of the things I will say about each one of these growing regions is within those communities where agriculture is the basis of the community, you have farmers and ranchers that are very active within their communities. They've established political subdivisions like irrigation districts and other types of infrastructure within those communities for not only water delivery, but within their communities to support those communities. And so what you'll find in the growing regions that we've identified is that agriculture is really ingrained in those communities. Not only is the agriculture industry an economic driver, but it also drives some of the supporting industries around it. And some of the infrastructure that's been set up to support the agriculture industry in these communities also supports the other parts of those communities, like municipal systems and those types of things. And so what you'll find in those communities that we've outlined is a significant presence of agriculture and active engagement in working to resolve the issues within those areas, and quite knowledgeable people on the various aspects that impact that region. And so just wanted to refer back to those maps that we had submitted on behalf of the Arizona Farm Bureau that sort of outline those major growing regions within the state. And that's it. Robert, do you have any closing comments?
I will just say thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you for reaching out to hear about Arizona agriculture. We appreciate the opportunity, and if you have any questions, happy to do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Philip and Robert. That was great information, great job. And I want to really thank you for leaning in and submitting map and recommendations, because that actually cuts to one of my major questions, which is, what are your recommendations? And so for us to be able to go back and look at that is invaluable. I have maybe a couple follow-up questions, but before that, I turn it over to my colleagues first, please. Questions?
Oh, this is Commissioner Lerner. Thank you. This was really fascinating, and I love the juxtaposition with the previous presentation on water. That really puts it into perspective. I just have one to start with, and then I'll have Chair Newberg ask her questions. And that was education. I thought that was an interesting point. You were talking about education and technology and the needs there that exist. And I know in Michigan, Michigan State has very specific opportunities for people to learn about agriculture and farming and those professions. What do we have, and how do you see that maybe thinking towards the future when you're talking about a decline in workforce and workforce needs? How can you connect that with, you know, in rural areas, very often they don't have educational institutions that can provide some of that for the people who are going into those professions. This may be a little bit outside of our communities of interest topic, but I look at education as one of our key factors, one of the key areas that we have. So do you see specific needs, specific things that can be done around the state that can help ensure that these professions don't decline because of a lack of opportunity for people to learn how to participate and be a part of that those professions? Hoping that question makes some sense.
So first, I'd say I think we're blessed here in Arizona with an excellent cooperative extension through the University of Arizona, both on the education side, but also on the partnership with the business community and the agriculture community. Many of their programs and facilities really blend what you're talking about, Commissioner Lerner, of getting people interested in bringing them into careers in agriculture or a livelihood in agriculture, while still having that day-to-day impact on the agriculture being done. Ensuring that those programs have the resources and continue is important. And I know as I'm sitting at the U of A, that's a big plug for the U of A, and I'm okay with that as a graduate. But you also look at all of our universities across the state and what type of investment are they making in their programs in the biological sciences, the plant sciences, the animal sciences, the veterinary sciences. Those are all even 2-year degree programs or 4-year degree programs are going to have an impact on the industry. Much like anything, if we're able to grow our own on what we need for future science and technology here in the state, and they're from here, they're more likely to stay here and may continue to make that positive impact across Arizona. And that's what we're looking for on behalf of our members. I mentioned our facility in Salinas. That was the idea behind it. It's only a few years old, but we've already had a few companies spin out. And so looking at some of the tech transfer programs with the universities, getting people interested that in someone relatively new to the industry, ag is tech. It really is. And getting that message out, I think will attract. So getting kids getting kindergartners in a tractor and seeing what it's like, that some of those are almost the same amount of computers and screens and everything going on that a plane has. It's that level of technology now in some of the equipment, or a lot of the equipment, I should say, sparks the interest in a child and will lead to a career in the industry. Phil?
So Robert mentioned our extremely robust cooperative extension program, which is really fantastic. I mean, the University of Arizona and their cooperative extension and the other universities around the state are really doing cutting edge technology when it comes to the natural sciences here in Arizona. And then not only that, but the engineering, the computer science, and everything else that needs to go into those natural resource industries. But one of the things that I will say about our member farmer and ranches is they've taken a significant investment in education through the Arizona Farm Bureau. We have an entire education department. Robert talked about getting young children on tractors to see what that's like. We have an entire program where we have staff in the classrooms every day doing that. We also have certification programs through the Agricultural Teachers Association, which are in communities throughout the state, to help those students develop the skills necessary and that agriculture employers are looking for when they graduate from high school. And then also supporting our supporting our natural resource programs within the universities and higher learning. And so it's a little bit of plug for the Arizona Farm Bureau. However, it does show in how we're working with these local communities and the agriculture community within those areas to promote those programs and opportunities.
Thank you, because I know the cooperative extension from just using it for my own gardening, but I didn't realize the extent that it had across the state. So that's great to hear about all of these opportunities. I appreciate learning more about it.
Absolutely.
This is Commissioner Meal with these presentations were really informative and really interesting. And this, I have more of an observation than a question because I think it's a challenge for us as a commission. It helps explain and helps me understand why the rural areas have not grown in population. Because even though they have incredible importance to our state, and you see that actually economically they're increasing in their activity, and yet the efficiencies that they're driving are causing them not to really have population growth in these areas. And the population growth is predominantly in the urban areas. So us trying to protect the communities of interest of the rural agricultural areas is going to be a real challenge and a real importance as we do our work.
You know, to piggyback on that, it actually taps into a question of mine. Are there particular industries that you've addressed that are at specific risk? And are they receiving the type of collective representation to empower their industries? And related to that, if you don't mind me just, piggybacking my second question, where are these hubs of interest? Meaning, you spoke about, and you did a great job of highlighting the specific areas. Thank you. That's so helpful. But is there additional information you'd like to share about where the hubs of influence are related to cattle, cotton, other industries that we ought to be aware of as it relates to Commissioner Meal's comment?
Robert, do you want to take that on first, or?
I'll let you, Phil.
All right.
And please, we're asking very pointed questions. Only, respond in the ways that are appropriate and comfortable. So, please.
Well, one of the things that I would say, and I appreciate the complexity of the job that you all have agreed to do. This is a very complicated issue, and a lot of factors at play that you have to take into account as you're drawing these maps. But one of the things that I would mention is that, as you have such an urbanized area in the central part of the state, and that can tend to dominate things as you have that large population there, and certainly having a concentration of districts within that central part of the state. I think one of the things that we're most interested in is ensuring that the rural communities around the state, because agriculture is within all of those communities, and because agriculture is such a driver for so many of those communities, that you really take that into account as you're developing these districts, and ensure that there's ample rural representation as we're developing those districts. Again, I'd point you to, I don't want to go into all of the areas that we've identified, but I would point you to those maps once again that we've sent in, with the facts about each one, the various commodities grown there, and those types of things. A lot of those growing regions are in the southern part of the state because, obviously those are the climates and soil conditions that allow for, in intensive crop agriculture. But I would also point out that the northern part of the state is largely cattle production, particularly up in the forests in those areas. And as you look at the forests and the interaction between federal lands and those folks who are managing those lands, through grazing and those types of things, they have a unique set of interests as well, and a unique set of challenges as it relates to utilization and management of the forest, but also wildfire protection, watershed protection, and those types of things. And so, again, I would identify those maps, but then also point out that the northern part of the state has some unique challenges, and there's quite a bit of agriculture up there, and by way of cattle grazing in those operations. So, I'm not sure that answered your question to the specificity that you would have liked, but
you submitted maps. So you answered the question. Thank you.
I would just quickly add, building off of Phil's comments, recognizing that not splitting agriculture communities, sometimes it works and sometimes really doesn't work. And I know that's a kind of broad statement, but there are times where perhaps a truly ag-centered district would be beneficial, especially when that is a significant or majority of the economy, ensuring that the entire region would have that single representation. So Cochise County, Pinal County, the growing regions, Yuma County, the growing regions. Whereas and on the other side would be looking at the agriculture communities that are adjacent to the urban, or really suburban and urban communities. So, first comes to mind is the West Valley you have urban, suburban, and ag all in, within a few miles of each other, if not honestly adjacent to each other, of having multifamily housing next to fields that are then next to a kind of, 6-7 acre neighborhood. So taking all of that into account and using your collective best judgment of what is truly the best representation for those communities would be appreciated. And I know all of you signed up for a very thankless job, but it is appreciated very much by all Arizonans.
we certainly thank you.
And we thank you for being part of the process. It's a collective effort. Any other questions? Well, Philip, Robert, thank you for helping educate us and make sure we're aware of additional, farming, agricultural interests of the state. It really did help shape, our understanding. So with deep appreciation. With that, I'm actually going to suggest that at this point we take a 5+ minute break. We're probably more than 50% through our agenda, but given that we'll need a break coming up, I think it's a natural point. And so with that, why don't we take a break and then we will reconvene and start up with agenda item number 6 from our mapping team. Why don't we say 9:35? Okay, we'll give it another minute or two and we will reconvene. I was a little optimistic with my time estimate. Okay. Do we have our team back? I see the commissioners. Brian, Val, give me a thumbs up and we'll
There we go.
start.
I think we're ready.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We'll dive right back in. We are on agenda item number 6, update from the mapping consultants, Timmons and DC. I turn it over to Mark and Doug.
Good morning, commissioners. That was a great presentation from the growing people, and they did say they submitted maps. And I would like to say that if somebody goes to our public submission dashboard, you can actually see their maps if you go up to the top right corner under the advanced search and you type in growing region. You can see that they have submitted 4 different maps. Yep.
Is there a way you can share your screen so that as you're instructing us, we can actually see it? Because that would make it more likely that we're going to actually do it.
All right, one sec. Trying to split the tabs out so I can still see you guys on one screen. Hold on.
Because that is something that I think we'd like to look at.
Okay, let's do this for a second. So on IRC's website, if you go to public meetings listening to round 1, and you go down to the dates, there is, with every date, there is a link to the submission dashboard, which is here. If you click it, it's going to open up a new tab. So that means that I need to share that tab with you. So hold on a second. It takes you to this publicly available listening tour submission dashboard. And you can see it's got all 910 comments. You've seen this product before. If you go up here to the top right-hand side under advanced search, that says none right this second. If you click on it, it gives you a pop-up box that you can start typing things in. And you can type in anything from somebody's name to a specific topic. So if you type in growing region, we can see that they submitted one for Yuma, one for Gila Valley, one for Pinal County, and one for Cochise County. So if you want to select one, just click on the one that you want, and it takes me to the Yuma one, which is here is the map for Yuma. I click on that polygon, I get exactly what was submitted. So Chelsea McGuire submitted on behalf of the Farm Bureau. And here is the description talking about the winter lettuce capital of the world. And the Yuma region is growing and responsible for keeping the entire U.S. supplied with fresh leafy greens. And then if you want to go back and see the other things that she submitted, you can go back here, click the advanced search and go to growing region and select the next one down that you want. So Gila Valley, there's the Gila Valley polygon. You can click on it, same thing. Here's the pop-up box of all the information. If I go back and we can see here's Pinal counties, again with all the information. And the last one is Cochise County, and that is the Cochise County polygon that they submitted. So anybody can get there today. Like I said, it's totally public, and that's exactly how you use the advanced search. And then if you wanted to, on this pop-up box, you have some arrows there, so you could start to see polygons that are sort of in the same area if you wanted to start sorting through them. The only thing that you'll see is you won't see the polygon change until you clear out the filter. So I hope that that helps.
That was awesome. And you know what? I hope we have more and more time with you leading us through these tips to understand how much data you have provided to us. And it's fabulous. So thank you. Please continue.
Okay. Hold on a second. I think the first update that I have to you guys that is on the agenda that I'm pulling up, because I lost that tab when I shared it with you guys. Update on census data integration. So good update for the census data. Esri was able to successfully download it and process it. This week they are loading it into our system. And at the end of this week, we'll be loading the specific state of Arizona data into the system. So everything is on track and actually trending a little early right now. So Esri started their application update and data update yesterday. So that is all positive news going forward. For mapping software public training update and additional software training. So we definitely are aware that the public wants training. And we've sort of talked about it. We have a two-pronged approach that we would like to take. One, we've always talked about YouTube videos that are, I shouldn't say YouTube videos, videos that are very targeted on specific topics that people would like to use, certain functionality. So instead of trying to watch an entire 90-minute video, you could go something that's targeted within a couple minutes to learn exactly what you want to do. The second item that we were thinking for the two-pronged approach is that we conduct on the Timmins side, not on the Esri side. So Timmins would provide a public training opportunity in a live meeting like this where we could walk everybody through from start to finish. And the date that we were thinking about was the 13th. I know putting a date out there, but that was a date that we were thinking that we could do that and bring everybody in. I know that hasn't been vetted from you guys, but that was what we were thinking internally. And that's really the two-prong approach that we would like to take. I know training seems like we've been asking for training for a while. I hope the commission and the public realize that in previous years that the census data would be out in March, and then the training would come sometime towards the end of April. But because the data has been so delayed from the Census Bureau due to COVID, we actually did a training session for the commission before the last final update and before the 2020 data was released into the Arizona system. So preferably, we'd always like to do training after the system is up and live with the current data set. And that's why we we are proposing to do this second piece of training on the Arizona system with the data for 2020.
Mark, this is Commissioner Lerner. For the videos, would you also be able to have those up by September 13th? Because I think the public would like to have access to those. We've been talking about that for a little bit as well, on you being able to get some videos done. Those short ones, which are, I think, a great idea.
Yes, so I provided to the IRC staff, to Brian, the YouTube videos that are out there from Esri, the more generic ones. We would like to have all the current data and the last update from Esri on the system installed, ready to go before we created those short videos. That way, everything looks exactly the same that the public would be seeing. So yes, our target would be to have them done by the 13th. But that's why they're not done.
And the Esri videos are in the newsroom on the website.
Oh, perfect.
And just to be sure everyone's expectations are straight, though, we can't make the videos until the system's up and running. So I think Mark's hoping we'll be a little ahead of schedule so we can get them live, but the system's not scheduled to be up until the 13th. So the videos may not be ready till then.
Yes, very, very good point, Doug. The schedule always said the system would be up on the 13th from the very beginning.
Yeah.
We are moving as fast as possible to get these things delivered to you guys ahead of schedule, because I know everybody is waiting for these things, and the anticipation is there.
Thank you. That's great.
Any other questions about training or census data integration?
So just a quick follow-up on that question, the comment about additional training on the 13th. That would be for the public, for the commission. Can you just clarify what you meant by that? I'm glad to have another chance at this.
Yeah, our plan would be to do it live in a public session like we're in right now, where the commissioners are there, the public's there, and they can see it. Then the public, then they can also say that they received the same training as the commission. We're open to other ideas. If you guys have other ideas for training, that is what we were just talking about internally.
I think it's a great idea, and it's also, I think, reassuring to the public that whatever training we received, essentially just click on your YouTube that's on our website, and we're in it together. So I think we're going to be learning side by side, and it's clear it was a great start to helping the commissioners understand the language, understanding the basic software technology and what's possible and how it, can, work out with the, mapping process. But we're all collectively in need of additional training. And we're deeply appreciative, Mark, for you being so on top of it and to be able to, carve it down into language that I think will be effective for all of us. And, we're looking forward to it. And it will be in advance of when we draw the lines. So we're all good with the time frame.
Good. If there's no other questions on those two topics, then I'll throw it over to Doug to discuss competitiveness, compactness, and continuity formulas. I believe he has a presentation for you.
Yes. Let me share my screen. There we go. Can you all see the criteria list?
Yes.
Okay. So this, if you don't have this memorized by now, you certainly will by the end of the process. But this is the full list of criteria that the Constitution lays out for how the grid maps will be adjusted. And today I'm going to cover these 2 points, primarily the issues of being compact and contiguous, and then touching a little bit on the other criterion that we have not talked about in detail yet, which is about following different kinds of lines. Obviously, you've talked extensively about communities of interest. We have the previous presentation on competitiveness and the Commission's direction on those fronts. And you've also heard about the federal requirements at the top. So this kind of rounds out in-depth discussions of the various criteria. So first of all, we'll start with contiguity, since it's kind of the easier one. But of course, nothing in this is simple. So there are really 3 different definitions of contiguity. One is kind of any part of a district touching all other parts, including just at a bare point. Then there's often talk about more than a point connections. And then sometimes we get able to travel connections, where can you actually drive or walk from one part of a district to another. Looking at these, here are 4 just sample maps. Some of them I drew for this presentation. Others are, one of them you probably recognize. But all of these meet the any part of the district touching. So if the black shaded area is a district in the top maps, it's connected only at a point in the middle of an intersection. But the black district would be considered as connecting and touching and contiguous if point contiguity is okay. Similarly to the right, the black shaded area is actually connected by the width of a freeway. So it is connected at a point and then some. The bottom left district, this is an important point to make, which is this is actually an old California district where the south part of this district is a series of cities connected by a mountain range and national forest. And so, yes, it is, it looks clearly contiguous, but the trick is it's only connected by hiking trails, but it would meet any part of the district's touching. And then the bottom right, you likely recognize a congressional district from 2001 to 2010 in Arizona that was connecting using the Colorado River. And so it was connecting any part. So the basic definition of contiguity, all 4 of these maps would pass. That's the little green stars next to them. But that's just the bare minimalist definition of contiguity. Often the rules are connecting at more than a point. So using these same 4 maps, 3 of them, the top right and the bottom 2, all connect at more than a point. There's a substantive territory connection of all parts of the district. The top left, however, since it connects just at a point, would fail that. And I am going to get to how the software checks all this, so you'll see a real life how you would do this for any map. But so when you get to that more than a point, some districts now violate that definition of contiguity that otherwise would pass it if it was simply any part touching. Then we get into what some folks talk about when they talk about contiguity, and that's, can you travel from one part of the district to another without leaving the district? So obviously, the point contiguity map in the top left would fail that. The bottom left, it actually, in that district, would depend on if foot travel counts. You actually probably need rappelling gear to travel it. So it likely fails. You certainly cannot drive from one part of that district to another. But the top right map, where it's connected just by the couple, I think 1 or 2 lanes of the freeway, that actually would pass the contiguity argument. And then in Arizona, there was a big debate because this congressional district actually could be traveled one way if on the river. You could not drive it, but you could take a boat down the district. So would that meet that definition? That's a debatable question. So depending on which definition you use, you can get different answers. Within the redistricting system, you can see here, these tabs will become very familiar as people go through it. But when you have a map in front of you, you just go to review and check integrity. And this runs a whole bunch of checks. It also runs before a map is submitted. And the plan has to pass all these before you can submit a map. So when folks get into the training session in more detail, they'll learn more about all these checks. But the last one runs as a connectivity check. I do want to note that the Esri system doesn't rejects point contiguity. So if you only have point contiguity, that map in the top left, Esri is going to say, no, that's not contiguous. There needs to be a territory connection between the two. But Esri does not require travel contiguity. It does not require the ability to drive from one part of the district to another without leaving the district. So if you just had touching at a point, it would fail the test. If you had more than a point, it would pass. And if you could travel it, obviously it would pass. So contiguity, I'll go back to that for a second. So contiguity basically is pretty straightforward. Depending on which definition you use, generally speaking, and this isn't a hard and fast rule, generally speaking, travel contiguity is ideal, but territory contiguity, where it's connected by territory, is sufficient to pass rejection in most definitions of contiguity.
Doug, this is Commissioner Lerner. Just a quick
Yes.
question. If you can go back to that other slide, please. So the one where you had the question mark in 2001, I don't know what happened, but what was that accepted or not?
Yes, there was litigation. This was the big debate about should the Hopi Nation be with the Navajo Nation in one district, and so there was litigation, and the plan was approved as drawn. And just for folks that didn't follow it all that closely, the reason for using that was the path to connect the Hopi to a separate district that picked up the fewest residents of the Navajo Nation. So it wasn't drawn just to be cute or anything like that. Any other census territory that would be picked up would pick up residents of the Navajo Nation into this district that was intended to put the Hopi with somebody else.
Thank you.
Yep. And I'll actually come back to that district in the discussion of compactness in a minute as well. So contiguity is pretty straightforward. You got a couple of ways to define it, but they're pretty straightforward and pretty easily understood. Compactness is more challenging. So again, the statute in Prop 106 says districts shall be geographically compact and contiguous to the extent practicable. What does it mean to be compact? The standard idea, kind of speaking generally, is try not to bypass, a compact district would not bypass one group of people to get to a more distant group of people, just as an idea. Mathematically, there are lots and lots of compactness measures. The Esri tool contains 7 of them, but that's nowhere near the full suite of compactness measures. You can go to American Mathematics Association conferences, and there will be panels on measuring compactness of districts with all kinds of options. It is pretty straightforward to run. You just go to the review tab again, and to the left of the check integrity is the compactness test report. And what you see below is what it generates. In this case, I just did a sample just from one district, but it would have the full list of districts here. And if you had a full plan, there would obviously be no unassigned column. So you can see the list here. I'll go through them in just a second of what these different names mean. So here's a bigger example of, you get lists of, from, in this case, all 9 congressional districts. They just roughed out a junk map in order to show this report. One thing you'll notice right off the bat in the numbers is that some of them, like the area test and the perimeter test on the left, generate values. Others, like the REOC test and the area convex hull test, generate ratios, so numbers from 0 to 1. So different measures work in different ways. There are also varying opinions on whether the average compactness is the key number to look at, the median. In the cases of like area tests and perimeter tests, does the total value matter the most? Or are we really just using compactness to identify extreme cases? There's no consensus on what is the best approach in these situations, and you'll see as we go through this why there's debate about the different ideas. As I note here, used properly, the measures are helpful, but always keep in mind these measures are all imperfect. And you'll hear a lot about Polsby-Popper and the perimeter test. They're probably the most often quoted measures. That has evolved primarily because they're the fastest to calculate and relatively easy to understand. And just because they're mentioned the most does not mean that they are better than the other measures. There are measures out there that can take half an hour to run. So those are used much more rarely than these Polsby-Popper and perimeter, which only take a couple of seconds to get a whole report on a map. So keep that in mind. The measures that are most often quoted are usually the fastest to run. They're not necessarily the best. So looking at definitions, first of all, the polygon area test, you can ignore the polygon part of that title. It's just telling you the total area in square miles of each district. So on the theory that a smaller district is more compact. Now, of course, in places like Arizona, where you have mixes of rural and urban areas, that rural-urban mix may drive the results of that number more than whether the districts are theoretically compact, whether they're bypassing people to get to other people. So the area test is a simple measure. It's really easy to understand. It's simply how big are the districts. But obviously, the sum is going to be the sum of the state every time. The perimeter test, the second one listed here, similarly, really straightforward. Just how long is the outer boundary? If you're dealing in an urban area, that tends to indicate, are you stretching districts out and making them longer and having longer borders in order to bypass one group of people and get to another? So it's useful in that context. The challenge is that, again, when you have a mix of rural and urban districts, the perimeter test will actually come out better if you group all the rural areas into one district than if you have two districts covering the rural area, because those two districts will have really long boundaries since they're both rural. So it's useful, especially if you're looking in an urban area, to compare two maps, the urban part of two maps, but it can be skewed by if one person takes a different approach to the rural area than another. You get two very different results, even though the districts may, in reality, just be similar in compactness. Just one person has 2 seats in the rural area, the other only has 1. So those simple measures are really easy to understand and quick to calculate, but they do have drawbacks. The Groffman test is the first of the ratios. It measures the perimeter and then compares that to the square root of the area. Each of these formulas you'll see get into kind of more and more obscure mathematical calculations to try to come up with the best measure of compactness. So that's simply comparing the perimeter to the area, trying to get it kind of how close to a circle are you, and generally is the idea there. The horribly named area/convex hull test. This one I actually went online and found a illustration. So you can see the picture below. And I did not ask them for permission, but I do cite with a link there, so I appreciate them. It's kind of a Wikipedia for math and science type of page that had this illustration. So if the gray area is a district, the gray shaded area in this image, and each of these kind of nails from their illustration is a corner or a point where the boundary of the district turns. The area of the district is the area shaded in gray. The convex hull is if you take essentially the best description is take a rubber band and snap it around the district. The rubber band's going to catch on the points highlighted by the green nails. And so the convex hull is that outer edge. And so this gets you a ratio of how close to perfect efficiency and being perfect in matching up are those two lines, and how many weird jigs and jags are there in the border of the districts. And so that ratio, is going to be a measure of compactness. So another couple of ratios, the REOC test calculates the ratio of that area to, instead of a rubber band snapped around it, it actually draws a circle, a full, perfectly round circle around it. Same idea of a ratio of the area to the surrounding circle, but obviously you get a bigger area not in the district if you're using a circle and if you're doing the convex hull test. The Schwartzberg test is another circle to district ratio. It's how long is the perimeter compared to a circle that has an equal area. So if your district is a perfect circle, it's 1-to-1. But each point that your district moves away from being a circle, you're going to get a lower ratio. And then Polsby-Popper is similar to Schwartzberg, but with a slight difference. Again, it's the ratio of the area of the district to the area of a circle, but instead of the circle having the same area, this circle has the same perimeter. So the same idea, if your district was a perfect circle, you'd get a perfect 1-to-1 ratio of both Schwartzberg and Polsby-Popper. But as you move away from being a circle in your district, you'll get slightly different scores, even though they're taking the same idea. I did want to note, those of you with sharp eyes may have noticed that there's a holes report listed in the Esri compactness report. That actually isn't a compactness measure on its own. What it's doing is flagging for you that there is a hole, either an unassigned area or a district completely contained within the district you're looking at. So the reason they flag that is that, especially for the perimeter and some of these other tests, if there's an unassigned area or a completely enclosed district within your district, it's going to skew your measures way off because that internal boundary of the district is also going to get added in. So the holes, just so folks are aware, the holes report is simply hey, you might want to fix the hole before you run this report and actually evaluate the plan based on those numbers. But back to the compactness measures again. Here's a summary table because I'm not expecting people to memorize all this information. Obviously, you'll be coming back to this information again and again, and this information is all online in the Esri help system as well. But you do have kind of ratios, you have measures, and things like that. And then over on the right, this is an important reference that you'll want to pull up again and again, which is, okay, if we have these ratios, is 0 good or is 1 good? Or in the case of Schwartzberg, you get higher ratios. So this is, you always have to come back and double check that, oh, that's right, 1 is generally the best score. And as you get closer to 0, it's a worse score. So this is a key point. I borrowed this table from Gary King, the Harvard professor who I talked about previously on the competitiveness issue. He came up with his own paper on a much more complicated approach to compactness. But at the end of it, he had this handy table where over on the right-hand side, you can see he's pulled a whole bunch of examples of districts. And mainly if you look at the 3rd and 4th columns here, depending on the measure, which of these 2 districts in the 3rd and 4th columns is more compact will differ. So the REOC test, that 3rd district, kind of the left-facing dragon district, will be more compact because it's closer to a circle than the district to the right that clearly looks more compact. So depending on which measure you use, in certain circumstances, you can get different measures. And this is true of all the measures, not just the ones he's listing here. Polsby-Popper and convex hull, again, the third and fourth ones differ between whether convex hull thinks it's more compact, the one on the left of the third and fourth column, or whether the King proposed measure thinks it's more compact. So keep in mind, this is why adopting just one measure can lead to issues down the road, is that the measures can differ on which districts are more compact. And a key point when you're looking at these different maps is to remember to compare maps in the same area. If you're looking at a district, in an area where there's a coast or weird city borders, and you're following city borders, you might get that district might look very non-compact than a, frankly, gerrymandered district somewhere else that's just drawn funny for alternative reasons. So it's always important to compare just districts that are in the same area or a statewide map than to look at a district, say, in North Arizona and compare its compactness score to a district in Tucson. That's not a fair comparison because all the other factors in geography can distort the compactness scores. And keep in mind, not all shapes are bad. So again, coming back to the Arizona map, back from 2001 to 2010, there had been a long debate about the Hopi Nation and should it be in the same congressional district as the Navajo Nation. The decision, I'm not praising it or criticizing it, simply saying the decision was made that in the congressional map it should be separate. And so for a very clear community of interest policy decision, the result was a very non-compact district to reach that goal. As I mentioned, the reason it's so non-compact is that any other approach would have picked up Navajo Nation residents and put them into that district, when the whole goal was to give separate representation for the Hopi versus the Navajo. It's a great illustration of not all shapes are bad. I don't mean to bring that issue back up because that issue was largely resolved in 2011, and I don't think that, at least so far, we haven't heard much of it this year. But it is a good illustration of a policy-driven reason for non-compact district. Similarly, here's an example I use a lot. This District 3 in the middle, the boundaries look really strange. Why are all these jigs and jags and hooks? Why not go with following major roads? Well, in the case of this district, which actually in the San Francisco Bay Area, those jigs and jags are following the city borders. So the green is a city, as are each of the colors is either a city or a census designated place. And so the lines are very carefully following those official community boundaries. So they look funny, they look like non-compact zigs and zags, but there's a clear policy reason driven by the underlying community for those reasons. Last one, Phoenix. Many of you may be aware of the Phoenix City Council districts. District 6, from the day that Phoenix went to district elections through multiple redistricting sessions, District 6 has kept this unusual mix where Arcadia in the north part of the district and Ahwatukee in the south part of the district are connected by a very narrow, essentially a street connector, like that one I was showing my sample maps early on. Is it compact? No, definitely not. Is it contiguous? Yes, you can actually travel. I believe that is a street, so I believe now you can travel. When it was first drawn in the first map, it was actually a easement for a gas pipe, so it was not something you could travel except very awkwardly. But what it's doing is putting together two areas that were considered to be similar communities of interest and avoiding putting those with a very different population and communities of District 8. So again, not all shapes are bad. Famously, the line is that the shape or a funny looking district is a flag that should trigger people looking at why does this look so weird. It's not necessarily condemnation just because it looks funny. And again, coming back to the standard idea of compactness is where possible, within all your other considerations you have to take into account, try not to bypass nearby areas of population and take in more distant populations. The mathematical formulas are handy and helpful, especially when they tend to get cited when you get into what's a significant detriment to compactness when looking competitive districts. Then you might want to use some of those numbers to determine whether or not you think it really is significant. But ultimately, the idea is about keeping people together and not bypassing folks. So that's a lot on compactness. I did want to cover briefly the other factor, but let me pause here and see if there are questions before I go on.
So I have a fundamental question. Do we need to decide up front which specific measures we're going to adopt, or are these merely tools that while we're mapping, we rely on these mathematical formulas?
You don't have to. There's no requirement that you adopt a measure up front, certainly. As you dig into this process, you can adopt the different commissions, and even the 2001 commission took a different approach at different points in its process. You can talk about, do you want to say a significant detriment to compactness would be below this measure on this score? Or you can simply exercise your judgment as you go through. So I think that from a practical side, that's what I'll say. In part, this is also a legal question as well, so I'll leave some of that for them.
Thank you.
That was my question as well, was, at how we actually move forward with this. To be sure, we're all sort of looking at things in the same general way. But if part of it might be that we revisit this in a few weeks once we start looking at maps, and then have a discussion about some of that. I know when we did our training, I was looking at those numbers, trying to understand them. So this is very helpful. Gave me some knowledge now that I didn't have. But I guess that can be part of our discussion as we get more comfortable in evaluating maps. And then perhaps you give us some ideas on which maybe 2 or 3 measures we might want to focus on versus 8 or 9, if that's where we want to go.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. And again, there's one fun paper that gets quoted a lot, where one gentleman who actually wrote a paper with his own measure being proposed, his conclusion was that despite all these mathematical measures, the best measure is still what he called the interocular test, which is a big, complicated academic joke of saying, how does it look? And you can kind of see, does this map look compact or not? And if not, then you can get into the underlying features of why is it not compact, and is it justified or not justified based on that. So yes, you can certainly hold off, and maybe the commission will find it's having fairly solid consensus, and it doesn't need to get into the specifics of the measures versus a 0.2 versus a 0.4. Or if you do kind of get hung up and there's debate, well, then one way of resolving a dispute might be to look at more seriously considering a formal look at a specific dividing line.
This is Commissioner Meal. I think we're obviously going to get all these measures automatically out of the mapping system that we're using, and I suspect on most districts we're not going to care about these, and then there'll be a few districts where we may care about these a lot. So I'm very comfortable holding off, and then at the time that it really comes into play, we can all make whatever arguments or observations we're seeing in regard to the use of the measures. I think that'd be a good way to go.
Sure. Yeah. And one thing,
I think that's important to clarify, though, because when we're not deciding upfront what explicit measure we're using, that leaves open the room for us using it as an art, meaning, you know, a little bit more broadly. And I'm comfortable with that. I mean, as you say, Commissioner Meal, you know, maybe at the end of the day, the specific measure is not going to be a huge determinant of the lines. So, but I just wanted to understand what was, you know, necessary of us in terms of making decisions right now.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that there, obviously, Arizona, you know, had the first truly independent statewide redistricting commission, and all it said was this rule that you have of compact. There was a great deal of debate about that. When California kind of followed in Arizona's footsteps in 2010 and wrestled with, should we be more, you know, should we learn from the first experience that we should define it? They did decide to define compactness, but they did also bypass all the mathematical measures. And they simply said the map should be compact, and compactness means not bypassing one group of people to get to another group of people. So that has become a fairly commonly used phrase, and definitely has been, when there are statutes enacted referring to compactness, it's almost always that approach, not a mathematical line drawn in the sand. Okay, so that was the big complicated part of this presentation. If any other questions before I move on to the wrap up with this last simpler part? If not, I will go ahead. So then the last criterion that we haven't talked about in depth is this kind of catch-all section about, to the extent practical, district lines shall use visible geographic features, city, town, and county boundaries, and undivided census tracts. As with all these criteria, it does raise a couple of questions, but it's relatively straightforward. First of all, district lines shall use visible geographic features. This comes up all the time. It's a traditional redistricting principle, things like that. The visible features could be rivers, canals, hills, mountains, roads, railroads, anything that really makes it easy for the voters to understand which district they're in. The idea is, if a voter wants to go knock on doors for a candidate, let's make it easy for the voters to know which doors to knock on. And that's a lot easier if it's the freeway to the river than if it's, so you go up this street, jog over that street, go up this street. Or even worse, follow invisible census block borders in an area where there's no feature there. It also makes it much easier for residents to ask their neighbors, hey, I'm having this problem. You know, I need to call my legislator. I need to call my congressman. Do you know who it is? Well, it's much easier if everyone in the area knows the freeway and the river are the border, to say, oh yeah, you're in that district, call so-and-so, than if you have to figure out, like, oh, are you the 5th house on the block or the 7th house on the block, kind of thing. So pretty straightforward. Just using visible features so it's easy for people to look around and say, which district am I in? There's also a line in there saying district lines shall use undivided census tracts. I don't know the history of including this and why it was in there, but it is worth noting that this is the definition from the Census Bureau of what a tract is. It's aimed to be a stable geographic unit over time, so that it makes it easier for people to look at, say, 2020 census data and compare it to 1990 or 2000 or 2010 data. They generally have a population size between 1,200 and 8,000, with a goal of having about 4,000 people in each one. So very roughly speaking, tracts can be considered roughly large neighborhoods. But that's very roughly speaking and not a hard and fast rule. And tracts don't stop at city borders and those kinds of things. So it is in, I don't know the whole history of why it's in the Prop 106, but thankfully tracts are a really easy feature to see in the mapping system and to understand, to the degree that the decision on where to draw a line comes down to that point. The one that raises a little bit of question is the part of this criterion that is district lines shall use city, town, and county boundaries. So the question that this doesn't answer is, does this mean cities, towns, and counties should be kept undivided? So we should be trying to keep a whole city in a district or trying to keep a whole county in a district? Does this criterion mean that? Or does it mean more that just if a district line is ending up close to a city, town, or county boundary, the district line should follow that city, town, or county boundary rather than be one street or one census block off from it? To be honest, it's not clear which way that goes. This has not been hotly debated as far as I know, in part because even if this criterion doesn't encourage keeping cities, towns, and counties together, well then a city, town, or county could certainly be considered a community of interest. You know, it meets all the reasonable definitions of community of interest if a resident proposing a map and ultimately the commission wish to make a decision that led to keeping that together. But this is something that has come up kind of when people are studying the Arizona criteria and trying to decide whether or not to use them in their own redistricting proposals in other states, much more than it has come up actually in the Arizona redistricting process. But it is in there. There is clearly a recognition of city and town and county boundaries in the criteria through this phrase. But it's unclear whether they should just be used like streets and railroads as they follow the line when you can, or more like tracks, you know, geographic units and communities of interest, geographic units that should be kept undivided. It's just an open question to your judgment on that. But again, it hasn't been hotly debated because even if it is determined this language doesn't say keep them undivided, well, then they could certainly be considered, and you could try to keep them undivided under the community of interest goal. So again, here's the criteria that we'll be seeing again and again and talking about again and again throughout this process. But that wraps up my presentation. So any questions about that last piece? Or about anyone?
I just want to say thank you because this helps us get now the full picture of the different criteria and the things we need to look at and we need to consider. So I appreciate the clarification on some of these.
Commissioner Mule, the question, is it even possible for us to divide up a census tract? Isn't that the smallest thing we have to work with and we can't divide them up?
Actually, the terminology definitely gets mixed up a lot, but so there are actually census block groups and blocks within tracts.
Oh, okay.
So that you're right, the census block is the smallest unit of geography that we can't really divide up, but to tracts we can.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We'll be sure to put the various discussions of the various criteria somewhere easily available because these are intended to be referred to again and again. It's not something, especially the compactness measures test of what's good and bad by each score. That's something you almost have to look up every time you run it.
Thank you. That gives us, just a very important context to be thinking about, all of just the decisions we're making. Very helpful.
Doug, were you going to talk about the competitiveness?
Just there, it was passed along that there was a request to have a clear summary of the commission's decision on that, and so we put together a slide. My appreciation to legal for catching a typo on the slide before it went live, but we'll put that on the website so that folks can. It's just a single slide summarizing the commission's decision on that front.
And an important note for the public when reviewing that competitiveness measure, it is an initial competitiveness measure that the commission has adopted. We have not ruled out the possibility of further adapting that over time if there's sufficient reason to do so.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's exactly right. That was the commission's direction. I would add too, this commission's in a new era. As we talked about with the competitiveness, people can, one of the beauties of the system, it's really easy to export the file, send it off to another site, and people can run their own competitiveness tests if they think they want to share with you a better measure. Similarly, from today's presentation, compactness. If people like other measures of compactness, they can easily export the file and run their own measurements on those files. So you are likely, unlike previous commissions where there weren't these resources online, you are likely to get lots of input using measures beyond just the ones that you formally adopt.
And in the areas where it's appropriate, we have the flexibility to make, decisions down the road. And so that's helpful for us to know what's locked in and what is open to renegotiation, and reconsideration. So very helpful.
Definitely.
If there's no further conversations on that issue, I believe that we're moving into polarization data.
Doug, you know if Lisa is online?
She just texted me to say she doesn't have the link. So let me see how I do it. Here we go. Send that to her. Okay. We've been juggling schedules today to try to make this work out because she actually had a 9 a.m. meeting that she was already committed to. So we weren't sure if we'd squeeze her in before this or after that meeting. So she is available. We'll get her online here.
And if for your, expediency or whatever, if you want to move to E or F and come back, please, manage the time per, your convenience.
Do you want me to jump to F, Doug?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. We can jump to F, and F is the topic about discussion regarding ethnicity, demographics, and concentrations of communities. And I will point out that, in the socioeconomic web app or the story map, because we provided two different populations, it allows, products, not populations. It allows the public or anybody for that matter to start to look at demographics for a bunch of different ethnicity points and other data points for the entire state of Arizona. So they could start to draw similarities out of the data there. And it's a big choropleth map and easy to read and colorized. And everybody can get there in case no one has seen it. I will share my screen again with you if you don't mind. If you go to IRC's website, click on the Maps button, it takes you to this. Click on the Socioeconomic Web Report, and now we have two of them. The first one was the web app that we came up with. The second one was the story map. And I know we've shown this before, so I'll be brief. But since the topic has come up, you can come over here and start to look at voting age population variables for the entire state. The first one is the Latino. And we can start to look at areas that have some red in it. And we can zoom in on the map.
Mark, it's not showing up. It might be on another tab.
Ha. Yes, hold on. Let's see. There we go. Same product we've shown before. So I won't touch on it too much, but how you can use it to get these demographic points is over here, voting age population variables. We have different ethnicity demographics broken out. You can easily click on one. We'll start with Latino because it's listed there first. And we can start to look at different areas of concentration of Latino voting age populations. So you can either use the zoom in buttons, or we can draw a box in an area that we'd like to see, and we can click on the data. Maybe not. Hold on. Love live demos. There we go. It was just slow. So you can start to see all the census block, the demographic variables, and you can start to see the percentages here. So here it has a Latino citizen voting age variable of 45.47%. And even though we didn't turn on the other layers, you can actually see in the pop-up the entire breakdown of what that looks like and all of the other different demographic variables. So this is a way, easily to be able to see different concentrations or different patterns around the state. And same with African Americans. We can zoom in and start to see different colors. And again, you can click on the variable and get all the numbers that you would want. You can see here the African American citizen voting age population is 92.82% for that census block, along with the other demographics. So we've definitely provided that to you guys in a publicly available setting, so anybody can go in there and see that. All the buttons are there, so you can even jump down to language at home. So I think for more information, if you're looking for, why demographics are this way in Arizona, we would like to refer you to using the state demographer on that. And we think they could be able to easily provide you guys a history of demographics for the state of Arizona, why they've changed, why they are today, moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. This is Commissioner Lerner. I was particularly interested in that historical perspective because I think there are patterns that have occurred that people are unaware of over why populations are located in certain areas, just as we're learning about the 5 Cs on how things have evolved, which has been very interesting. It might help to have some context over why our populations in particular areas around the state as they are communities of interest and as we are moving forward. I'm fine if you think the state demographer can provide that information. I also know of, we might be able to get some of it from some ASU researchers as well. I was at a conference in the spring where we were actually hearing some of that same information from some researchers about where people are located and the history of why they located in those areas. And to me, it just puts a little context in, but we don't need to belabor it, but I think it's helpful for us to understand it.
And Ivy on our team reached out to some geographic professors at ASU and U of A, asking if they would like to, come present that type of data and information to the commission here. But we did not get in any takers on that.
And that's fine. If the state demographer can do it, that's fine with me. I have some other contacts that I could always assist with if that doesn't work out, of some people who were a part of that conference, who basically that was what the conference was about, was understanding that context. So I'm happy if we can start with the state demographer. But for me, it's just like we learned sort of a little bit of context about the 5 Cs. That's all I'm looking for, is just a little bit about that.
Gotcha.
And it seems that we will have a nice intersection of information, meaning the mapping folks can provide that kind of visual, objective information about where the populations are and have been. And what I'm hearing Commissioner Lerner is wanting a narrative, a verbal, trace of data of how we've gotten where we are. And that's absolutely doable. And I know staff is on top of this to be, thinking through how we can best synthesize that information and share it with the commission and the public. But it's a partnership with our mapping folks. So thank you for getting it started.
You're welcome. And I believe the state demographer does track all of this too. So they would be the ones that would have some good knowledge there.
And then I can, I'll share a couple of contacts as well that maybe might be helpful, as terms of context if the state demographer doesn't work out or doesn't have that context that, at least that I would hope we could gain.
Great.
So Dr. Hanley is here. She's oddly enough appearing under her husband's name as Richard Carver in the in the list of participants. But if the commission's ready, we can jump into her presentation. Just very briefly, I've talked about her and her background before. She's the head of a consulting firm that does polarized voting and general election consulting, both across the country and actually around the world. She's an election observer and election system consultant all over the world, and it's pretty amazing to sit down and talk with her about her work. Primarily, though, today she is, if not the preeminent, she's certainly among the top preeminent voting rights experts in the top tier in the country. And she has worked with Arizona before. In 2001, her reports were used as gospel by both the commission and by the plaintiff side. So it was not controversial, and she's familiar with the complexities and challenges of Arizona and its geography and demographics. And as you requested, she's here to talk a little bit more about what a voting rights report is, how it's put together, and what kind of information you will get when it's complete. So with that, I will hand off to Lisa.
Thank you, Doug. I would like to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint. I want to show you a bunch of diagrams. Hopefully you're not too tired after this. I'm going to make this brief. I've got about I hope it's not more than a 20-minute introduction to how I'll be doing my analysis of voting patterns race. So how do I do this? I'm so used to Zoom, and this is, right. So I don't know why I came in as my husband.
Down next to where your mute and camera buttons are, there should be a little square with an up arrow that says present now. That's your share screen button.
Oh dear.
So once you click the square with the up button, you get three different options. Either present your entire screen, a window if you just wanted to present PowerPoint, or a tab if you're doing this in the browser. Once you select one of them, if you select share your entire screen, another pop-up box is going to come up that says you're going to share your screen. And I believe you have to hit accept or OK.
It is not allowing me to. It says window or screen, select window or screen, and it doesn't allow it. And when I hit, it's only letting me hit block.
Let's see. I think.
Do I have to be a co-host or something like that?
Yeah, I think I have your slides. I do. Do you want me just to share them?
Oh, I changed them a little bit, Doug.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it doesn't have so much, but.
So if you go present and you see a window is selectable.
All right, so where I'm stuck now, where I am, let me see if I can go back. It just said always block. What is it doing? All right, Doug, let's go with sharing the screen, if that's all right.
Sure, sure.
But I've got to put what I'm going to be saying over here. If I don't have it on my screen.
There we go.
Okay, so what I want to talk about is figuring out if your redistricting plans comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Arizona is one of the states covered by Section 5, and as you know, that has disappeared, but Section 2 is still very much with us, and it applies to the entire country, including Arizona. So you will still be doing, or having someone like me be doing a racial block voting analysis. And the reason is this. Doug, if you want to bring up the next. A redistricting plan that violates the Voting Rights Act cracks or packs a geographically concentrated community across districts or within a district that dilutes their voting strength. So you need to, but it only does so if voting is polarized, if minorities are a cohesive group such that they have candidates that they prefer as a group, and if whites block vote to usually defeat these candidates. If those two conditions are present, then you cannot crack or pack minority voters. The next slide. The first case that considered the newly amended Voting Rights Act, it was amended in 1982 to make it clear that you don't have to prove discriminatory intent. You only have to prove that the change has the effect of diluting minority votes. So even if you draw a districting plan that you didn't intend to discriminate against minority voters, it could still be found to be dilutive. And there are three conditions according to this court case. Three preconditions. The minority group must be sufficiently large and geographically compact to form a majority in a single member district. 2, the minority group must be politically cohesive. And 3, whites must vote as a bloc to usually defeat the minority group. So how do we know if the minority group is politically cohesive? And how do we know if whites are bloc voting to defeat these candidates? Of course, the ballot in our country is secret. We don't know who cast what ballot. So we need to do what's called a racial bloc voting analysis that uses aggregate level data to make estimations about how groups are voting. In order to do this, we are going to need to put together precinct election results. We need 2 pieces of information, in fact. We need election results. This is where we're going to get the voting behavior from. And we need to know the demographic composition of the precincts. And we're going to see if there is a pattern across precincts based on the demographic composition and how the precincts are voting. The most relevant contests for these purposes are recent contests for the opposite issues. So we'll be looking at state legislative and congressional elections. We'll also be looking at statewide elections. And the courts have found that the most probative elections are those that include minority candidates. And looking over recent elections in Arizona, you have lots of contests, especially at the state legislative level, primaries and generals that include minority candidates. In terms of the demographic composition of the precinct, you have several choices. There are a number of states where you have registration by race. These are mostly in the South. Arizona is not one of them. You have voting age population by race now that the PL data has been released. But in Arizona, where you have a large non-citizen voting age population, what we're actually most interested in is the citizen voting age population. And the reason is that you want to get as close as you can to the electorate who's actually casting the vote. And if you have a precinct with a lot of non-citizens who cannot vote, you want to take that into account when you figure out the possible demographic composition factors. So here in Arizona, we're going to be looking at citizen voting age population by race. Now, citizenship question was not included on the census form, but it is included in another product that the census releases, and that's called the American Community Survey. And we'll use the information from that set of data and apply it to the PL data, so we have an estimation of citizen voting age population for each precinct when we do this analysis. Okay, so that's the database that we're going to use. And as I said, we're going to be looking for patterns across these precincts. Now, if you had a precinct that was, say, 100% Hispanic or 100% white, all the precincts were 100%, we would know how whites are because we have only whites voting in those precincts. The same if you had heavily Hispanic precincts. And we do look at that information. That's called homogeneous precinct analysis. It looks at precincts that are overwhelmingly one race. And it looks and it compares overwhelmingly white precincts, for example, with overwhelmingly Hispanic or, say, Native American precincts. But that only takes into account precincts that are not very integrated, and it's quite possible that voting is different in precincts that are more integrated. It also is only looking at a small number of precincts. So these are the two standard techniques that have been developed over time to consider all of the precincts in the analysis. The first is called ecological regression analysis. That's been around since the early 1980s, maybe even prior to that. This is the technique that was used, one of the techniques used by the plaintiff's expert in Thornburg v. Jingles, the case I mentioned earlier. That and homogeneous precinct analysis were the only two techniques that existed then. So the Supreme Court has essentially approved those two techniques. I will be using homogeneous precinct. I will be using ecological regression. The other statistical technique is called ecological inference. And this was developed by Gary King in the 1990s. And it was developed in part because ecological regression has a problem associated with it. The big disadvantage is, especially if voting is very important, you can get estimates outside logical match. You can find something like 101% Hispanic vote, a certain candidate. All right, I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about how these two. Next slide. First, ecological regression. Every precinct in the jurisdiction that we're interested in is represented on the scatter plot by a point. So we know, and this is a real election that I analyzed. This is the U.S. State Senate contest in the state of Georgia, the runoff in January of 2021. This is a county, which will remain secret, but this is a county. And each precinct in that county has been placed on the scatter plot on the basis of two things: the percentage Black turnout. You'll recall that I said that some states actually had registration by race, and we can use the voter lists and actually find out the percentage turnout of Black turnout and white turnout in any precinct. So we're very close to the electorate. And then the percentage of votes cast for Warnock in that precinct. And you can see a very distinct pattern here. The higher the Black turnout, the more votes for Warnock. And ecological regression actually notes the linear pattern, and the computer will fit for you a line that best fits these points. And the point at which the line crosses the zero axis, where I'm talking about on the horizontal axis. The point at 0 is the point that we use to be our estimate of the percentage of whites voting for Warnock. And the point at which the Black turnout is 100%, or the proportion is 1, and that is on the right of the scatter plot. That's our estimate of the percentage of Blacks who voted for Warnock. So this is one technique. As I mentioned, it has a disadvantage, and that disadvantage is apparent in this. If you drew out a line, you would see that the line probably hits the one proportion a little bit above the 100% vote for Warnock. Okay, so the other method that we have is called ecological inference. And here, instead of every precinct being represented by a point, in this technique, every precinct is represented by a line, and the line represents every conceivable combination of white and Black votes that could have produced the election result that we see for that precinct based on the percentage of votes for Warnock and the demographic composition. So, for example, if every Black voted for Warnock, how many whites were left that could conceivably vote for Warnock? If only half the Black voters voted for Warnock, how many white voters? And you get a probability line. So each precinct is a line. And then the computer calculates for you the point at which the lines are densest. And that is going to be our estimate of the percentage of Black voters. So this gives you the best estimate for any given precinct, the red dots, and then the computer will also produce the best single estimate given these points. Okay, so what does all of this mean? Let's look at the next slide. This gives you an idea of what a report would look like. For every election that I analyze, you will see the names of the candidates, their race, their party, the actual percentage of votes they got, and then the estimates of minority votes and white votes that went for the candidate. We'll actually have homogeneous precinct estimates, we'll have ecological regression estimates, and we'll have two types of ecological inference estimates. And the reason for that is that there's an even more newly developed technique that takes into account differential turnout. So we'll have something called EI 2x2, which means a 2x2 table, 2 candidates, 2 races, and an EI R times C, which expands the number of rows to include those that did not vote, so that we can look at differential turnout. So in this example, we see that our estimate of the percentage of Black voters who supported Warnock was, if it's ER, 94.9%, and if it's EI, 94.4%. And the percentage of white voters who supported Warnock is 23.5% if you're looking at ER, and 23.5 and 25.5. Now, the estimates will very rarely be identical, but if they are very likely to be close, and you don't need them to be identical. They were derived through different methods, and the chances are they will vary, but they won't vary by very much. And even, let's say, your estimates were, say, 94.9 and 89.4%. We still know the vast majority of Black voters supported Warnock, and it doesn't really matter what the actual percentage is. So this contest is polarized, and it's polarized because the majority of whites supported Warnock's opponent, the white Republican, and the vast majority of Black voters supported Warnock. So Black voters in this example are cohesive, White voters are block voting to defeat Loeffler. And if this election had occurred among Black voters alone, Warnock would have won, but among white voters, in fact, Loeffler would have won. So that's an example of a single election. You're going to look at a whole host of elections because, of course, what you are interested in is seeing if this is a pattern that holds across many elections. If only one election is polarized and the other 9 elections are not, you don't have the same kind of problem that you do if 9 are polarized and 1 is not. Okay. If you have a consistent pattern of polarized voting and the minority preferred candidate usually loses, you have to draw minority districts. If minority districts already exist, and the only reason the minority preferred candidate is winning is because they exist, then you have to maintain those districts. And you have to maintain them so that minority voters have an opportunity to elect their candidates of choice. I think this is the next slide. I think I've just, I wonder if we've lost. Okay, let's go to that. Okay, so how do we know if we've drawn districts that will comply with the Voting Rights Act? The Supreme Court told us very clearly in a case decided just this last decade that we do not just choose an arbitrary target like 50% or 55% minority and apply it to the entire state. We have to do what's called a district-specific functional analysis. By district-specific, we mean, although we might look at patterns across the state, when we go to draw districts in a particular area, say in a particular county, we need to take into account the voting patterns in that county. I can tell you from the work that I've done so far, it makes a big difference where in the state you are. I showed you an example of a rural county in Georgia for this particular election. If you were in Fulton County, it would look very different. And in fact, in some state legislative districts and congressional districts in Fulton County, voting wasn't polarized at all in that particular election. So it very much matters where you are. So there are 2 approaches to this district-specific functional analysis. By functional analysis, I mean based on voting patterns. So you have to be area-specific and you have to base your assessment on actual voting patterns in that area. Doug, if you could move to the next one, this describes the 2 approaches. The first approach is that you can take the estimates that you've derived from your racial block voting analysis, and you can use those estimates to produce what's called the percent minority voting age population, or probably in Arizona, possibly citizen voting age population needed to elect the minority preferred candidate. And you'll do that by looking at participation rates of minorities and whites, the degree of minority crossover voting, and the degree of minority cohesion. And that will allow you to ascertain what percentage minority voting age population would be needed. This is an analysis you can do prior to drawing your districts. The second approach can only be drawn upon if you've actually produced some proposed districts. This takes the result of the racial block voting analysis and identifies specific bellwether elections. Now, these bellwether elections most likely have to be statewide elections because your district configurations are going to change. And what you need to do is you take previous election results and you reconfigure them to look like the current or the proposed district to see if your minority preferred candidates would actually carry this new district. And the next slide gives you an example of the, I think, did you miss one, I hope?
Oh.
Or did I? Yes, this is the one I want. Okay. This is the analysis that you can do prior to drawing districts. So this is actually just the results of the racial block voting analysis. In the first column, we have this is the percent minority in the district. We have the race of the, in this case, the Black preferred candidate, the vote for that candidate, and then the next few columns are based on the racial block voting analysis. So we know what the participation rates are. The first three columns looks at Black voters, the participation rates, the percentage votes that the Black voters cast for the Black preferred candidate, and then the percentage of votes by subtracting that from 100 that went to other candidates. The next three rows look at white voters. Again, the estimate of turning out and voting for that particular office, the percentage of votes that white voters cast for the Black preferred candidate, and then the votes that they cast for all other candidates. You can see that the amount of crossover vote you're getting in these examples is between about 23 and 28%. This isn't a whole lot of crossover voting. But it's enough so that it turns out that you don't need a majority Black district in this particular area. A 35% district would not produce wins for these candidates. I'm looking the second to last row. But by the time I get to the 50%, the minority preferred candidate is getting over 50% of the vote and winning solidly. And the actual percentage based on these calculations are in the final column. But what you're really interested in is looking at a whole bunch of elections and looking at how the candidates do if the district is 35, 40, 45, 50%, by looking down those rows and seeing how many elections, but down those columns and seeing how many elections the minority preferred candidate would win at that concentration. And then the next slide shows the second method. After you've drawn districts, you can recompile the results. And these are proposed districts, districts 1 through 10, and this tells you how those candidates would have performed in those districts had those district lines been in place at the time of the election. And in conclusion, what you need to take away from this is that you need a racial block voting analysis to determine if voting is polarized. There's also the first prong of jingles. You have to actually, to bring a successful Section 2 suit, you have to be able to draw a majority minority district. To keep an effective district, however, you don't necessarily want to draw 50%, especially if the numbers show you that, say, 48% would be sufficient. While plaintiffs would have to show that you could have drawn a 50, you need to show that what you've drawn is an effective minority district, not one that just meets some arbitrary target. Okay, I am done with my presentation and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Any questions at all?
This is Commissioner Lerner. I have a question. It's a lot of information to take in. I will say that, but very interesting. So how, I guess I'm a little confused still. You said that there are two ways to do it, one after, one with data that was done before, and then one with some looking at it after you have some data. As part of that, just trying to look at, well, I guess, well, those, we saw that the numbers aren't vastly different between the two measures, right? So I guess can you just walk me through a little bit about what data will you be using for Arizona? What would you be looking at as to try to help me understand what you'll be doing for us?
Okay, so we're going to construct a database that will include the demographic composition of the precincts and the votes cast for each of the candidates in a series of elections. We're going to focus on those elections that include minority candidates because the court has made it clear those are the most probative. So I'll be analyzing voting patterns based on that election precinct database. And then I will tell you if voting is polarized in particular areas or not. And then I will use those estimates to use that first approach and tell you what an effective minority district would look like in a given area. And then as you're drawing districts, you will have a database that disaggregates the election results down to the block level, so that as you're drawing, you can tell how well the minority preferred candidates, based on the racial block voting analysis, are doing in the draft districts that you're drawing. This will be incorporated in your software. Racial block voting analysis will tell you what elections are the most probative to look at when you're recompiling these results. But you'll have an idea as you're drawing which recompiled election results you want to focus on to determine if you're drawing an effective minority district or not.
So this will be statewide. You'll be looking at all of the precincts, right? Because as you mentioned, you have differences depending on where you are. You might have some differences based on southern or northern or urban or rural.
So we'll have a statewide database. I'll actually run the whole state once, and then we'll segment it out into areas that we're interested. Probably we're going to run the analysis by counties, so you get an idea what's happening in each county. And we might have to segment it even more, depending on what you and the lawyers think that we want to look at. But my first cut at this is always at the county level, because that's easy to derive from the election precinct database. I will know the county, I can select out those counties, and I can say, so statewide it looks like this, but here in this county, voting is less polarized, while here in this county, it's more polarized.
Thank you.
I appreciate you mentioning just bringing in legal counsel, that just to remind us that this is such an essential piece of data to be interpreted through, a legal lens, the commissioner's lens. So for us to understand how all of these pieces of information fit together. So that was very helpful.
Thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. I know you all might be getting tired, but probably not the best time to do a little statistics lesson, but I'm available to answer questions after you've had some time to think about this as well.
Well, and I imagine as the weeks move forward, when the practical data is going to be central to decision making, I think we may well have more specific questions and things like that. Any other questions?
That was a good question. Just to follow up, when do you think in the process of this we start to get that kind of data as we're working on our development of maps?
So my preference would be, although I'm doing it in segments, to wait until the entire analysis is done, but statewide, and it'll turn out that there'll be some counties that are difficult to do because you actually need enough minority voters to actually produce estimates. But certainly at least half of the counties. So we're going to wait until the analysis is completed. And I'm not really sure about the time frame on this. Once I get the database, actually this isn't even true. I'm directing the analysis, but it would certainly take at least a couple of weeks to do once the database is complete.
And just a quick update, we're very close on the database. So kind of the Timmons team has done a phenomenal job of building the contest by contest precinct databases and tagging the voter file and getting that all done. We're now pairing getting ready to pair the American Community Survey data on the citizen voting age population with that database. We're very close to having the data ready to start the runs.
So Doug, once we have the grid map done and we're getting all sorts of other stuff and input in, is that when this analysis is being done? So that by the time we start with the first, even the very beginning phase of trying to draw our first draft map, we would have all this data?
We'll probably have the grid before we have this report done.
Yeah, I didn't say the grid, but
okay.
But by the time we get to where we start the draft, working on a draft map after the grid.
Oh yeah, when you start making your decisions about the draft map, yes, definitely. We're obviously trying to get these numbers out ahead of time so that the public, as they're giving you input on changes to the grid, that the public can have it as soon as they can.
And given that this is the first criteria in the Constitution, from a practical standpoint, do we really concentrate on these minority areas as a first step in the draft maps? Or maybe that's too ambiguous of a question, but.
Well, I would just very briefly say the criteria aren't prioritized. So they're not, the list is not a priority order. And beyond that, I will defer to legal if they want to weigh in on that.
While we're waiting for legal, if they'd like to chime in, Commissioner Meal, I'd like to just say that I'm sharing, I think, a little bit of where your mind is going, which is I'm curious how the specific job maps out, like how we literally do the job of mapping and considering the different criteria. And I'm foreshadowing, but for a future agenda item, I'm going to suggest that, because for a lot of us commissioners, I'd like to speak for myself, it feels still a little abstract because we haven't done it. And so we're trying to understand how specifically we lock into these measurements and where it fits into how we're making decisions. And I know it's such a practical, specific question, but I think the more we learn about how that process is going to play out, I think we'll understand everything even a little more. And I don't know if legal counsel is here to chime in at all if they want to.
Yes, Madam Chair. Sorry, the technical issue. So I would just follow up with what Doug said in that there is no sort of set priority. I mean, the Arizona Constitution says that adjustments should be made to the grid map to accommodate the 6 goals. So ultimately, there's an amount of discretion there by the commission on, for example, what factors to consider first or second or third, but there is no sort of set priority in the law.
Thank you.
Just to acknowledge what I think everyone on this call is aware of is agreeing with what Roy just said and what I said earlier. It's not 1 through 6 prioritized. There is the language in the competitiveness criterion saying they should be favored where drawing them does no significant detriment. So we just wanted to acknowledge that language is in there without saying there's no number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
They may not be in order, but if we don't satisfy the Voting Rights Act, we don't have a map that's approved. So I think it's a pretty high priority.
Exactly.
This is Roy. I would agree with that, Commissioner Meal.
Any other questions? Or I keep my say Dr. Carver, but Dr. Hanley. I do want to pass along thanks to Dr. Hanley for joining us. She did kind of jumped on the meeting first, had to jump off to another meeting, and then came back to us here. So we're glad the timing all worked out. Thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for listening to me, and I'm sure we'll talk again. And I shall leave now and let you move on to the next agenda item. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Doug and Mark, I don't know if you have additional items regarding scheduling, grid map, whatever.
For the grid map, we're on schedule to complete that and present it to the commission on the 14th of September, which is actually the next meeting. So we don't see any issues there. On meeting deadlines, I'm for the grid map decision, public hearings. The schedule that we sent in is we're suggesting 5 grid map hearings, public hearings. With that being said, is that we're thinking Tuesday, the 21st of September, Thursday, September 24th, Wednesday, September 29th. Let me double check that 24th date. That actually might be.
Yeah, the 24th is a Friday, Mark.
Yeah, sorry, that's 23rd. So that is not the 24th. That is September 23rd. That is a Thursday. So I'll start over again, so that way no one is confused. So first one we're suggesting is Tuesday, the 21st of September. The second one is Thursday, September 23rd. The third one would be Wednesday, September 29th. The fourth one would be on a Saturday on October 2nd. And the last one, which would be the 5th, would be Thursday, October 7th. The point here is that we're going to get a lot of data from the public, and we're going to have to categorize that and take in all that data for you guys. So we cannot do meetings that are back to back like we did for the listening tour. There's going to be a lot more data that comes out us that we're going to have to present to you as the commission. So we definitely need some days in between. We could probably add one more day in there if we need to make it a total of 6. But right now, that is our suggestion for the grid map public hearings, with the goal of the decision meetings after the grid map public hearings to basically select your draft maps. The decision meetings would be the week of October 18th through the 22nd. And then that could bleed into the 25th, 26th, 27th, depending on how long deliberations are. And those are our suggestions. As a commission, you guys could have other needs. And that's what I have for you for dates. And I think we did previously talk about this, maybe not last week, but the week before.
So I will say that October 2nd won't work for me. Every other date works fine.
Okay.
Just to give context to the public and also connect it to the public comment response that I gave earlier, these are going to be robust public hearings once again, with really no time constraints, meaning we are going to make our teams available to the public, locations to be determined per our staff recommendations, to be listening to the public feedback. I mean, that is in essence what we're talking about. And so thank you to our mapping team for, making yourselves available for that amount of time. And we look forward to collecting the data.
And I will say with the schedule, we talked about going to 23-day period for the grid, which was approved. So that period, just so everybody is aware of it, would start on the 15th after we deliver the grid map, and it would officially end on October 8th. So that way everybody has that context too.
So I guess I'm just asking, what do we do about the dates? Do we need to do some approval of those? I had different dates. I know that they've changed from when we talked about it previously, which is fine. But Chair Newberg, what do you suggest?
Well, I think there are 5 dates. I certainly don't think all commissioners need to be available at each and every one. You know, I know that the staff disseminated these proposed dates. There were 2 options. Rather than having a full conversation online about what works for whom, what I might suggest is after the meeting, us going back to the 2 options we received with the dates, responding to staff about which meetings or dates, because we didn't specify times yet. You know, we want to make ourselves as available as possible. We're thinking about maybe, you know, different times on different days to, you know, appeal to all different types of demographics out there. But the first step, let staff know if there are general dates that you're not available for, and they can follow up and maybe lock in the time, because it's with these number of lengthy public hearings, I think it's going to be impossible for all 5 of us to be at all of them. It'd be great for as many of us to be available at, you know, at as many. All of them will be taped, will be, you know, collecting the data. So even when somebody doesn't physically participate, all of that information will be available to the public and ourselves. Does that sound reasonable to my colleagues and to the mapping team?
It sounds reasonable. Do you want me to talk about the other option that Commissioner Lerner mentioned?
Sure.
Because the first option that we proposed during the during the meeting that we had previously, it is the exact same dates for the first 3. So Tuesday the 21st, Thursday the 24th, Thursday the 23rd. I will get that fixed. Wednesday the 29th. The difference in the change there is the first set of schedule we recommended Tuesday, October 5th. And in the second schedule, we replaced that Tuesday, October 5th meeting and putting it on a Saturday on the weekend, being October the 2nd. And then the last meeting is always the same for both schedules, Thursday, October 7th. That way we have it laid out for everybody. So the real difference is that one meeting, whether a Tuesday or a Saturday, the 2nd or the 5th.
I would prefer the Tuesday to the Saturday, but maybe the public would be the opposite.
Right. I actually had a thought that having at least one opportunity on a weekend for working folks. I know it's a Saturday. In the past, we've talked about different religious observances, but if it's going to be on a Saturday, we could have it in an area that's not going to be highly observant Jews. So I think we can feel good about that. But I think it's important to have a variety of options, and that's our one weekend. So I vote for a weekend day.
I am not opposed to a weekend. I'm just saying that particular weekend won't work. I could make it the 25th instead. That's a different Saturday. And I would like to try to be there for all of the meetings if possible. I'm fine with a Saturday in general. I agree that it's nice to have the flexibility for the public as well. So we can go back and do this on email, I know. But I guess that's the comment that I will make.
Right. The one sensitivity I want to have is spacing the meetings such that our mapping team has the time to code the data and absorb it in the ways they need to. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board with the 2 options, maybe not think about it as 2 options, but maybe just come up with the best 5 dates that collectively work for us, understanding again that as much as we all would like to come to all of them, with that number of meetings, it just may not be possible. And I think accommodating the public needs to be a top priority. So maybe we can reconvene through email. The staff will reach out as soon as we lock down these dates and times. We can get that information out to the public if it's ready. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to be solidifying the plans. I don't know, Director Schmidt, if you have anything you want to add to the conversation.
Once we have the dates nailed down, we'll get the venues lined up, and then hopefully we can release that in the next week or so, so
Okay.
people have time to plan and get there.
And so, in other words, if there's specific information prior to when we reconvene in 2 weeks, check our website. We'll post any definitive meetings on the site.
I know that this probably is an error on my part, but I had noted that we might be meeting on the 9th of September. Are we not doing that? Just for clarification, because we were not meeting on the 7th. And again, might be my error.
Correct. We'll talk about that at the end of the meeting. After today, our next meeting will be in 2 weeks from today. We're taking next week off for the Jewish holidays. Okay, anything else from our mapping team?
No, I think that that wraps up our section there.
You've been very busy. We appreciate your hard work, and I know things are only going to get crazier for you as you're getting the data ready, and we'll look forward to those grid maps. So thank you so much, Doug, Mark. We appreciate you.
Well,
okay. With that, we will move to agenda item number 7, Executive Director's Report and discussion thereof. So Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I have an update on outreach. Our team has been working hard, getting out there, trying to make as many contacts as possible with different groups and organizations, cities, counties, towns over the last week. They've made contact with about 75 in just this last week. They've also attended different meetings with community stakeholders to discuss how to disseminate information best to the community. And then also we started a weekly newsletter. The first one went out on Friday, and we will be continuing that as we move forward. We're also working on developing a social media toolkit that we can get out to the public in different groups that they will be able to use. So that is my update on outreach. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or Marie or Alex. All right, if there's nothing.
Thank you. And I just want to say how excited I am that our outreach team is up in place so that when we do the next public hearings, we have all these tentacles into the community already. And, with all of the public comments, if anybody feels that, there are groups or anybody you want to recommend to add to our distribution list, please send them our way.
Absolutely. I'd love to have them. The other item on the agenda was a discussion about scheduling. We just wanted to make sure if we didn't touch on it in mapping that we made sure to talk about the dates. So we'll reach out to you all with dates, finalize that, and then get it on the website, send out an email, and things like that. So make sure to members of the public should be checking the website to see those. And that's all I have for you all today.
Great. Any questions of Director Schmidt? Okay, with that, we'll move to agenda item number 8, discussion of future agenda item requests. I made one of our mapping team, and there's no rush on this. I'm still really kind of grappling with what the specific drafting of the maps is going to look like. And why I'm asking that is as I'm learning the S3 software and I'm learning the vernacular and all of the data points that we need to consider, having a schema through which I'm going to apply that information helps my learning process. And I've never watched a redistricting process before. I can go back into the records, but I'm curious, you know, from our mapping team who's done this. That would be helpful to me.
Sure, we're definitely happy to put something together. And the advantage of having the 2 weeks before the next meeting is we'll have time to put something together in the next few days and run it past legal and commission staff and make sure everyone's on the same page with it. So we'll get that for you for the next meeting.
Thank you.
To add to that, Doug, we know legally that we can probably do this any way we want to do it. So what we're really asking you, I think, is for your experience, give us some guidelines on things you've seen before. And that doesn't mean we're obligated to do it that way, but just learning from your experience on how others have gone about it would be very helpful.
Makes sense. Definitely we'll do that.
Right. Best practices. What's worked, what hasn't worked, what are pitfalls?
Just say, and we'll share some worst practices with you too. So.
That'll make us feel good. Any other, please.
Oh, this is Commissioner Lerner. Just as a follow-up, hopefully we can have that discussion on ethnicity demographics in a couple of weeks, a short overview, and put that back. I'll work with staff too to just give some ideas if the demographer doesn't work of some other folks that I know of from that conference. And then will we be getting the community of interest report then at that meeting? Will that be something we'll be seeing at some point in the next couple of weeks, or will that be on the next agenda?
Yes, you can put on the next agenda. It should be 100% complete tomorrow, and we can share it with you at the next meeting. And once it's complete, we will share it with Brian and staff.
Madam Chair, in terms of the agenda for the next time, are we going to have a Arizona 5C presentation round 2? What's the, because I didn't hear anything about copper or mining, tourism, and I specifically asked for gaming because I think that's, that's a new and upcoming area, especially with sports betting. And so I'm curious, how the professionals look at that. So the 5C is plus. Is that round 2, Director Schmidt?
Yes, we are still working on scheduling all the different presentations. So,
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any other future agenda items? And just to remind my fellow commissioners, if something comes up, reach out to staff, just respecting the deadline with getting our agenda out to the public with a minimum of 48 hours notice business-wise. If there are no other suggestions, we'll move to agenda item number 9, announcements. The only announcement I have is a reminder to the public that we will not be meeting next Tuesday, which is the September 7th in observance of the Jewish holiday Rosh Hashanah. It's also, just I think a great pausing point as, we're moving into, collecting the data, our grid map, and things are going to heat up very, very fast. So I'm glad that we could take this moment. I hope the staff can get a brief, downtime. They've been working nonstop, tirelessly for months. And I'd also like to personally say, the Jewish holiday is one of reflection. And I just want to take this moment to really thank my colleagues. I want to thank my fellow commissioners. I want to thank the staff. I want to thank the public who are tuning in each and every week. Democracy, we're working for it. And this is an example of what's beautiful and what's right about our country. I have the deepest appreciation for your participation. Thank you. And I'm incredibly excited about the work that we're going to do moving forward. And thank you for your partnership. So we will take a break next week, reconvene on the 14th. Check out our website, like we said, for specific updates on potential public hearing dates. And if there are no further announcements.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
I have something.
Please.
Well, first of all, thank you. Great meeting today. 2 weeks ago, our governor, Doug Ducey, signed into law Navajo Nation Code Talker Day. So I think that's very, very important, significant, and it lends itself to, we talk about democracy, and we talk about, all the people in the state. And so I'm happy that the state now recognizes every year, August 14th, as Navajo Nation Code Talker Day. And so, during World War II, the Navajo language was used in the battles. And so we have a lot of elder Navajos, and obviously our tribe is very happy that the Navajo language was used in the war. And obviously we prevailed. And so I'm very happy that the state now recognizes this in our language. And so, it goes to democracy. To me, it goes to recognizing, the many facets of this state and the country. And so I just want to acknowledge and let the people know, in case you missed it, the state now has in August a Navajo Code Talker Day. And so I just want, make sure the public is aware of this. It's very important, especially to me and a lot of the leaders that I know here on Navajo. So I think that's a great announcement that I think everyone should know about. So thank you for allowing me this time.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, with that, we will move to agenda item number 10. Next meeting date will be September 14th, 2021, 8 a.m. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 11, closing of public comments. We now close public comment. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. With that, we will move to agenda item number 12, adjournment. I will take a vote to adjourn. Commissioner Meal. I'm sorry, Vice Chair Watchman.
Okay.
Commissioner Meal.
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner. Aye. And is Commissioner York? I think we've lost Commissioner York. It was great to have him for when he was here. Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With that, with a 4-0 vote, we will adjourn. Have a wonderful couple of weeks, and I look forward to seeing everybody a couple of weeks from now. Take care. Bye-bye.